Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, episode 83. I'm Steve Smith, along with Brandon Flanagan from the FM Tennis Performance Center in Boynton Beach, Florida. We're going to interview Warren Pretorius. Why don't you say something clever, Flanagan?
I'm not very clever, Steve.
Oh, come on. I always tell kids that you're all intelligent, but are you clever? Warren is the founder and CEO of Tennis Analytics. It's currently the largest worldwide match database in sports. Has close to 20 employees. Client of the USTA, Tennis Canada, 40 NCAA tennis teams, numerous academies, ATP, WTA players, to name a few. Novak Djokovic, Joe Wilfried Tsonga, correct my pronunciation.
Perfect.
Grigor Dimitrov, Maria Sharapova, Victoria Azarenka. Numerous events, Orange Bowl, is actually a sponsor. Grew up in South Africa, listed as being from Johannesburg. I believe he's actually from Nelspruit. We'll have to ask him about that. Came to the U.S., played college tennis. He's been in beautiful Utah more than 30 years. Played for Weber State. As a senior player, he's won 11 USTA balls, 4 national titles. Actually, that might be more than that at this point. Might not be updated. Following college, like lots of us, he worked as a tennis teaching professional for many years. I'm going to guess 15. He was the director of tennis at the Park City Racket Club. Park City, what a beautiful place. Former president of USBTA, Intermountain. Maybe Warren should have applied to be the CEO of the USTA. They're looking for a CEO.
There's still time.
I think it might be closed by this point, but he's done from A to Z. He's well liked, intellectual. I think it'd be wise to have someone like Warren be hired by the CEO. His connection with Dartfish, we'll ask him about that. Software, product, technical, tactical analysis is for sports. Based on his passion, his intellectual curiosity, I think he became Dartfish's first client, which led to a role as a pioneer leader for Dartfish. You'll be able to tell when you listen to him, he's a great speaker. He's made presentations all over the world. I think many things we can talk to him about. I'm interested in talking to him about other sports. I know his daughter played soccer at Harvard. But let's get Warren on the phone. I would say that Warren knows a lot about Vic Braden's contributions to tennis. Because I was one time at a USPTA function, and I went up to him. I'd met him years earlier, and I said, "You spent quite a bit of time with Vic as of late." And he actually said, "No, he had spent time with Mark Jakes, Dave Nostrand, and a young Andy Fitzell." But let's call him up on my phone skills, Flanagan.
Always a bit of suspense here.
Dialing once. 2 rings.
Hello there.
Good evening, Warren Pretorius, Brandon Flanagan, Steve Smith.
Hey, Warren.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Fantastic.
Thank you for taking time out of your hectic schedule to be a guest on our podcast.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Just went through some of the things that you've done in tennis. We just did an overview, but like we do with most of our players, or I should say most of our guests, you're started in tennis. It reads that you're from Johannesburg. I thought you were from Nelspruit. Is that how you pronounce it?
No, yeah. I'm Nelspruit. No, I'm from Johannesburg. I was born there, played tennis there, but I had family up in Nelspruit.
Oh, okay.
And so that's my connection up there.
Okay, because I know I can't pronounce his name right. Petrus Kukimore, great guy, but
Petrus Kukimore, yeah, great guy.
Let me hear you say that one more time.
Petrus Kukimore.
Yeah, one time I introduced him to a guy, and he goes, "Hey Pete, how you doing?" With Johannesburg, high altitude. With
yeah.
I don't think it was wise over all those years where the South African Tennis Union would bring all the juniors to Johannesburg for high altitude tennis. Although, with that being said, I think the USTA, they'd be wise to have a place like in Park City or in Colorado Springs, so you have a combination of experiences playing up in high altitude. But tell us about your beginning days in tennis.
Yeah, so I was a junior. I played a lot of sports. So it was we grew up in a very, very much a soccer family. And my dad used to coach. My mom, my brothers, and my sister, and everyone was involved with soccer. So after soccer, every day I used to go and play tennis. So he'd go wait for my mom to get done. On the weekends, she played at a tennis club, and then juniors were actually not allowed to play in that tennis club. So I just go grab a racket and hit against the wall, and I always loved it. And then I started playing, and I think I was more serious about soccer up until I was about 14 and 15, and then everyone started growing around me, and I was not as good at soccer when I was 16 as 15 and 16 because of physique, and all my friends were much were growing 6 foot and they were much better soccer players. So I was in tennis. Obviously, I just started playing much more tennis, and I grew up in a family. I didn't have a lot of I wasn't in a family that could afford to pay for private lessons, every week. I used to get maybe a half an hour private lesson here and there. But I used to, try to take group lessons. And when I did, or when I was able to get a group lesson, a private lesson, I would, be there half an hour early, ride my bike up to the courts, go sit and listen to him teach the lesson before me. And then I'd sit and wait and lap everything up, and then I would go out, take my half an hour lesson, and immediately when I got done, I'd go down to the bottom court and go and hit on the wall. So really got my money's worth out of that 30-minute lesson. And then I took group lessons, and I loved. The big thing is I love to compete. But it's just always playing matches, as many matches, practice matches as possible.
I was going to ask about soccer. Your daughter played soccer at Harvard, correct?
Yeah. So yeah, in Park City, she grew up in playing competitive soccer. She was very good, a lefty. She is a good athlete, and she played could play tennis, played all sports, but soccer was what she loved, and she was also a very smart, bright kid. Very driven, motivated. You never ever had to tell her to do. We never ever, groomed her to go to Harvard, but she got in on academics, and then obviously being a good soccer player was the difference maker. And so she went to Harvard, and graduated there, and is now. She went to medical school at University of Utah. And then right now she's a fourth-year resident in New York City. So she'll be done pretty soon, and then she's going to go do a fellowship after that. She'll start that in July.
That's impressive. I heard Dave Fish, the longtime Harvard coach, heard him say one time is that you got to be wound up in achievement from kindergarten to get there. But Brandon and I, we both went to Harvard, didn't we? Right, Brandon?
Spoke during commencement at Harvard, actually.
Yeah, for 5 years I spoke at commencement. I was there when Bill Gates was there. We were both training tennis teachers at Harvard.
Right, yeah, and they have a very good tennis team this year. I mean, they always, it's the whole thing. I think a combination of having a smart kid, who can play independently, think independently out on court, a smart kid and a good athlete, and lends itself very well to being a good tennis player. So they've had great, really good teams, and this year is no exception.
Actually, Henry von Schnellenberger, I think he's playing number one. He was sent to me when he was 8. He's an American who grew up in Switzerland. David Squire, an Australian coach, sent him to work with me, and I remember him telling me he was 8 years old. He said he'll be able to do 80 double jumps. He said he'll do more double jumps than anyone there, and he beat everybody in mini tennis, which was pretty much the case. But I remember staying at Fish's house, and I was training the tennis camp staff. Brandon was a director there at one time, and I don't think I knew how to use my GPS, but I remember stopping at a toll gate and I asked the guy, I said, how do you get to Harvard? Because Dave and his wife Bonnie went into work like at 4:30 in the morning, the opening day, and I had to go like at 7:30. I remember the guy said, oh, that's easy. Get to Harvard, you just have to study. But my question would be the tennis parent in soccer and the tennis parent in tennis. I was just thinking that, I mean, there's so many things we could talk to you about, but what are some of the differences coming to your mind?
Well, I mean, we all lived as coaches because I coached at Park City. First was at Ogden Athletic Club. I was the director of tennis there for a couple of years before becoming director in Park City. That's before I got into analytics and that. And so like I mean, we see the very best and the very worst of tennis parents. So I think that, I used to go to these soccer matches and, quite frankly, I was appalled at how some of the parents behaved, living vicariously through their kids. So I saw pretty much the same thing as I saw in tennis. And, I would never ever get caught up in it because it was always like, and we all, a lot of times, especially when your kid is playing competitive soccer, you didn't always agree with what the coach was doing. But we would never, ever go to the coach and say, hey, you should be doing this, this, and this. It was always up to him. And then we just, we coached our kids to say, hey, you know what? It's like you need to just, basically listen to your coach. And we're going to be cheering you on the side, but we're not going to be the ones. We'll motivate you, but we're definitely not going to be the one. You're not going to be embarrassed by us on the sideline. If anything, you'll be embarrassed because we cheer so loud. But otherwise, I'd learned my lesson pretty hard from what I've seen, on tennis parents.
I just think sometimes when it's a group of parents that are part of a team versus an individual, the team parent they come together a little bit more. I think it's, I think the social aspects, like say in college tennis, when the parents get together, makes it a little bit better. I always tell the tennis parents, be the furthest from the fence. And then if you could actually be at a tournament and no one knows who your child is, then you're doing a really good job.
Good. Yeah. Good point. Good tip.
With Brandon, you want to continue? Go ahead. You can ask a question.
Sure. About the parenting, I'm just kind of from your perspective, how you were parented growing up. You're a guy who played multiple sports, as you said, and were able to play tennis throughout as well, but into college. From your perspective, growing up in South Africa and the way you were parented, how much has that changed, do you think, up to present day?
Well, I think growing up over there at that time, there were a couple of things. There's some big cultural difference. Which, first of all, it's like we definitely grew up in that with the spare the rod, spoil the child philosophy. So we all grew up. I grew up in a very interesting but sad time. I mean, I grew up during apartheid. So I took I spent 2 years in the army there, and but you grow up with that thinking that, hey, when you get done with high school, you're going to go to the army. So I think that how parenting works, and even our sport, how coaches work, and all that, they work very. It was very. I don't want to sound wrong here, but it was very, kind of militaristic. It was like, hey, you listen to what your coach says, and you listen to what your parents say. So my parents, my dad was played a lot of soccer. He played semi-pro, and he also used to box. So he didn't play any tennis. But he, the only negative thing was that I'd always come to him, and I used to dread going to him and saying, "Can I have a check, to pay for this tennis tournament?" Because I used to go play these tennis tournaments and lose first round, and a lot of them were just single elimination. This was great when there was a round robin. I liked the round robin format much better because then I got to play more. But there were often times I play these tournaments and lose, and then I'd go back home and have to ask for another check. And my dad would say, "Hey, you know what? I'm paying all this money. It's like, when are you going to win? And so I learned, like, really early on, and then, like, I felt like I knew I was getting better. And, I just tell him, I go, hey, I don't know. It's like, I'm really, I really enjoy it. I live for the competition. But eventually that turned around, and, I started, winning a bit and all of that, and got over here. But I remember my dad once, he used to be working, and it was my mom who used to take us to the tournaments, drop us off, and we'd carpool and all that. So she would watch. But I remember one day, one very vivid incident was me playing and, like, losing my temper on the court and throwing my racket. And I didn't know that my dad was watching. And my dad walked out on the court and just said, "Give me your rackets and go shake hands with the kid on the other side." And I gave him my rackets, and I went and shook hands. And he said, "Get in the car. We're going home." And so it was a very hard lesson, because I had to, default out of that tournament. It was very embarrassing. And then he wouldn't give me my rackets back. He said, you don't deserve to play tennis. Like, you're throwing your rackets around, you spend a lot of money on them, and you basically what are the reasons you're playing? And then I had to think about it, and I think that was a good lesson. So I go back, and I think my dad actually got that from, because he coached soccer. So he also was he could use his coaching skills from soccer and translate them over to into tennis. And while I didn't like it at the time, it was a very valuable lesson in tennis, but also in life. But my parents were very supportive always. Loved us to be active. You go, you play, you compete, you be part of a team. And they would do anything for us to be able to be active. And I think it was much easier then also, because, we all grew up at that time that we didn't have TV. In fact, in South Africa, we grew up probably 10 years behind what was happening in the US. I mean, when I was, 15 or 16, we only had TV. We didn't have full, TV all day. We had 3 or 4 hours in the evening. And it was still very much, there was maybe only 2 channels. So we actually grew up in South Africa at that time with, TV and all that, very much like, so my in-laws grew up. So I think for us in South Africa, you go outside and you play. When you get older, you're going out, you're very active. You're in the park, you're playing pickup soccer, you're riding your bike to play tennis. You're doing things, you're not sitting around. You're not sitting around watching TV.
Were you pretty much self-taught as a tennis player?
Yeah, I think I was a visual learner. I think I had a couple of good coaches. There was one guy, his name, he was good, but there were some, like, flaws that he was a great player. His name is Willem Prince, and he went over. He played Wimbledon. He played in Germany. He played all over the place. He was really, really good. But he was more. He wasn't a technician. And there were a couple of things, then it's like I get ragged on by Andy Fitzgerald. It's like, he'll talk to me about my palm up serve. And I do. I have a palm up serve, but it's very, very difficult to correct. That years and years of that ingraining. It's kind of like my slicing golf. I'm very good at slicing because I've practiced it so much. So I wish I had going back. I looked at it and I would say that as a coach, I think that probably could have done a better job at developing developing technique early on, and I didn't get that. So one of the things I did get from playing all those matches, from playing pickup matches, is competing. And then I got. But I think lack of technique, like we know, limits you on execution of strategy. So I don't think I think I could have been better if my technique was better. But again, it's difficult to say at this stage. So.
And then from there, you were recruited and came to the U.S.
Yeah, I actually went. I'd actually given up tennis, and they're not given up tennis, but I sort of got out of the army. When I was in the army, I got to play quite a bit of tennis. I was very lucky that I could play tennis, because I got to play for the Defense Force, which you got to play. I got to play a lot of tournaments and all that. So after my first 6 months, then it was pretty easy. So we spent 2 years. So I got to play tennis, and when I got done with the army, much to my dad's chagrin, I had a bursary at a very big company called Goldfields, and it's a gold mining company, and they gave me a bursary. So it was 7 years of study, and then 7 years, and I could work for them for 7 years. And I turned it down. My dad was not very happy about it, because I felt like I wanted to travel. So to cut a long story short, is I went to Israel, because it was the cheapest ticket that my buddy and I could get. But I took my racket bag with me. And when I got over to Israel, I went with my friends and all that, and we went to work on a kibbutz. The kibbutz was in Haifa. And in Haifa, there was a tennis center, Israeli tennis center. And there was a guy there, his name's Ronnie Sender, and he was the director there. And I went out. I started teaching on the kibbutz first, okay. And they said, "Oh, wow, you play tennis?" And I said, "Yeah, I can." And I taught some. I done some teaching. And they said, "Well, we'll tell you what. Instead of you going out into the fields, picking cotton and bananas and all of that with the rest of the guys, why don't you can just stay here and just teach tennis?" So I was going, "That's great." So I taught the kids on the kibbutz in the afternoon, and in the mornings I'd catch the bus and go to that Israeli tennis center. And when I was there were some guys. There was Gilad Bloom, and there was Shah Perkis was playing, Gilad Bloom, and Amos Mansell, all really, really good players. And so I went there, and initially I met this guy, and I was just a hitting partner. I just went and hit balls. And he then told me, he said, "You should go play college tennis." And it was him who helped me apply to some colleges. And I went back to South Africa after that. And I went to Wimbledon in 1985. This was when Becker had beat Kevin Curran in the finals. So I went from Israel and I did some traveling, played some tournaments, and then went to Wimbledon. I did not to play, but just to be there. And then I went back to South Africa and worked, and then got that scholarship. The first scholarship, I got a scholarship at Limestone College, which is in Gaffney, South Carolina. And it was an NAIA school. And then a friend of ours was at the University of Utah. His name is Greg Menzies. And Greg Menzies and a guy called Paul Lobben were really good players in South Africa, and they were at the University of Utah. And they said, "Hey, there's this coach at Weber State who's looking for players." And so I applied there. And it was actually Brad Ferreira and myself came over at the same time and played it on Weber State's team. So they were a small Division I school, and with a great travel schedule and a really good team. And that's where I ended up, and that's how I got to Utah, and I'm still in Utah. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Just names. I remember Gavin Hopper. I was allowed to hire him to work at an academy. It was called Seguzo Bassett. It's now Chris Evans. Yeah. And I actually did a slow motion analysis for Amos Mansdorf. He never saw it. I remember doing one for Wally Masur. Those players were traveling with Gavin Hopper. But at one point, I know Dick Savitt, the Tennis Israel there was just one period where they were using Braden's first book, Tennis for the Future, to help their coaches. With Paul Laubin, I know he was a young junior that was brought over by Craig Webster. It's interesting.
Exactly. And Greg Menzies also.
Okay, yeah. With, but no, I can remember being at the Orange Bowl and with a player by the name of Ruben Perchek from Colombia, and one of the Israeli coaches just came up and said, "You guys like Vic Braden?" You could just tell by the way they hit the ball. But
yeah, it was actually a South African guy, Ian Froman, who was at Ramat Sharon in Tel Aviv, and it was a South African guy, who started the Israeli Tennis Center. And then they put them up all over the country, not all over, but they had a few of them in the country, and they were very successful early on. And they didn't differentiate between girls and boys. When they were brought up in development, they just said you're players. It was very forward thinking even then. That was in the late 70s, early 80s, that they had that philosophy. So there's quite a few good players come out of that.
We touched kind of a little bit on the parenting. I think it would be great to hear, say, the lessons you've learned, as becoming a scholar athlete yourself, and then having your daughter go on to become a student athlete at Harvard. I know there's a lot of tennis parents that listen to this. What are some of the parenting strategies that you kind of took from your parents, or some parenting strategies you used?
Spare the rod and spoil the child. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Say that one more time. I know you said it twice. Say it one more time.
Spare the rod and spoil the child.
Okay.
That was a little bit of no. We never. We grew up. I think it was the reason our kids did well at school is because of my wife. I mean, she was very supportive of everything that they did, but we were not going to be helicopter parents, or bulldozer parents. And that it was very much our daughter was that we have an older son, and he was he's very different. He's motivated by different things. So, what motivates one kid doesn't, there's not one size fits all. So for our older kid where it was motivating was, trying to get him to make sure he did his math homework kind of thing, and trying to say, hey, if you get an A, it's like, we'll do this, there'll be a reward, or if you get a B or whatever. But our daughter was where to sort of, I don't want to say demotivate her, because she always had that what do they call it, the imposter theory. She never ever thought, even through school, that she was good enough to be with the smart kids. She always saw herself as not being smart, and we knew she was very smart, but one of the things she had was a great work ethic. And we never, for us, it was even when she was at Harvard, she'd call us and be saying, oh, all my friends are going out, and this was a Friday night. All my friends are going out, but I've got this big test on Monday, and I want to go, but I also don't want to I don't want to screw up I need to study. And I'd just be saying to her, hey, you know what, go out with your friends, because there's more to being at Harvard than just getting A's. So she was like that the whole way through school. Like a really great athlete, worked very hard, but always carried that imposter theory. And for us, it was more me telling her, I'll give you $5 if you get a B, rather than, because we know that she's striving to get those A's. So she was motivated right from the word go. And even when she was 5, 6 years old, she always wanted to be a doctor. So now she's a doctor. But then I've got a younger son, and he was right in between. He didn't want anyone to help him with anything he was doing. No help with homework. He was always a kid who said, no, I'll do it myself. I do it myself. And he very early on he said, "Don't compare me to Alex." That was his whole thing. Was just that he was going like, "Hey, you know, I'm going to get B's and I'm going to get some C's and that, but it's okay. I know what I'm doing." So I think all of them were totally different. So we didn't have a plan. You know, if you got a plan, then you try and execute that plan with all your kids. I think for us it was sort of saying, you know, being there to support them, particularly in extracurricular activities, which we were adamant that they did. And I think that the most important thing is making sure you who they hang out with. And I think there was a quote that Vic used to say that, you know, if you want to soar with the eagles, don't hang out with the turkeys. And that was, our kids didn't hang out with turkeys. And I think that's probably the best thing. That's knowing where the kids were and then supporting them in everything that they did.
I think one of the key words there must be flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's not total flexibility. I mean, they just like kids in that we weren't, you know, I can tell you, I won't mention them here, but, you know, there were a lot of times you fail as a parent. You do things wrong and you have to go back and, you know, you look at it after the fact and go, oh my gosh, I could have handled that with my kids. You know, so much different. But yeah, I guess it's flexibility, but I think that I cannot take as much credit as what my wife can. You know, she was definitely there for them, you know, all the time. And there were a lot of times I was traveling and, you know, not able to be there for them as much as she was.
Let me share a joke. You've complimented your wife a couple of times, which is great. Behind every successful man is a very surprised mother-in-law. I tell parents, you know, sometimes, you know, if you don't schmooze, you lose. I mean, the kid sometimes who's getting all A's, I tell the parents, I said, you know, you should let your kid go to see a PG-13 movie. They're just going to get stuck in a back cubicle. You know, they need to be able to greet and meet and have some people skills. So I think you can be over the top with academia. Yeah,
I think also we also another think of it, you know, is with the people skills is one of the things with our kids. You know, we always reared them to be comfortable being around adults, and that was like in a social setting, and that didn't mean that they needed to join in and all of that, but it was like, hey, the first thing, you know, when we tell our kids is you walk over, I introduce you to somebody, you shake their hand and you look at them in their eye. And then once you're done with the introductions, then you leave. You go to play with the kids and that. But all of our kids were very comfortable if they had a dinner table or if they had a table and they invited to join in on the conversation. They're all very comfortable doing that, which also means that, you know, as a parent, you gotta listen to them and let them form their own opinions. And a lot of the times they're wrong. But yeah, that was the other thing. Our kids always grew up very definitely socially comfortable.
Coming back to the term militant, Dennis Vandermeer, who I spent so many years with, what are your thoughts on the difference between you want to categorize people, the Dutch and the English, as far as the Afrikaner? Dennis used to just say the Afrikaner is, and I've spent so much time with South Africans, a little bit more disciplined than the average Joe, the typical family. Kind of the yes sir, no sir, you respect your elders. And I've been there in recent years in South Africa and think that's very much alive and well in South Africa in comparison to other countries.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to generalize and all that, but definitely, it's the Afrikaners were more conservative, and the English were a little bit more liberal. So I got to experience all of this, you know, pretty firsthand because my dad was Afrikaans and my mom was English, and actually, you know, they were sort of frowned upon. I think more so from the Afrikaans side, from my dad's family side, that he had married an English, you know, an English woman, But yeah, absolutely. It's like in the army for sure. The Afrikaners are a very proud nation, and a lot of apartheid. We won't get into it, but a lot of apartheid, which is horrific. We all grew up in it, and while there's no excuse, I mean, the propaganda, the machine over there. You lived in it, and yet you weren't always asking the questions. Those questions, then I really had to reflect, because I grew up at the end of apartheid. I went overseas, and then when you were outside of the forest, I mean, that's when you really look back and question, what had happened, what you had lived through, why you didn't do anything while you were there. But going back to the English and Afrikaans, is that apartheid was basically inherited from English colonial system, and the Afrikaner nation, they implemented it, formed their own republic, and and then it became a Dutch or Boer colony before then returning back to becoming being an English colony, then going becoming a republic and having a nationalist or Afrikaner government. But yeah, the Afrikaans people were in my opinion were more conservative, a very proud, disciplined nation, and now obviously it's things have changed a lot, but still, I think a lot of the Afrikaners people are held in very high regard. Maybe not for all of their political views, but definitely for their work ethic and. Sure, and I think that's true for South Africans in general. Hardworking people.
The Afrikaner, for the most part, the English settlers were cityfied, and the Afrikaner was countrified. Correct? The Afrikaners were mostly farmers in the early days. Is that true?
Yeah. I wouldn't generalize, and I don't know enough about it, but I think there was some. I think true. I think in the beginning, it was definitely an agricultural based economy early on, and also mining. You remember that there's gold and diamonds and all of that. So when the Boers, the Afrikaners split with the English, they took that great trek. And that was the pioneers, and they call them voortrekker. Okay, a voortrekker is a pioneer, and they actually Afrikaans people then took their ox wagons and all that, and went into to form their own republic, and they were definitely farmers, and I don't think their intent was to go out and build cities. It was more to find their own land away from the English and. Farm.
One thing with Roger Federer, I think we've all read so much about Roger Federer. He's a little bit afraid of his mother. When he was a kid, he was a little bit afraid of his mother, Lynette, Afrikaner. My oldest brother, good. Who was in charge of, he was a GM, actually a GM twice, associate GM. With the Winnipeg Jets, the Toronto Maple Leafs, Chicago Blackhawks. And I remember him saying he wanted to draft players that were afraid of their mother. And I know that that's good for some boys, that they fear mom a little bit. With
maybe maybe I missed the boat on this one, but could you explain what a bulldozer parent is?
A bulldozer parent is like having a goal for their kids and sort of going ahead of them and bulldozing and just moving. Or snowplow parent is another way of looking at it. And what they do, instead of having their kids, they don't want their kids to make mistakes along the way. So what they do is they just bulldoze the path in front of them, and then so that their kids can come out nice and easy. It's kind of like the analogy with the parent carrying their kid's tennis bag when they to the court and carrying it back and all that. It's kind of like that would be like a simple analogy. It's kind of like, but using the tennis bag as an analogy to a lot of other things in life.
This is,
and saying that, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but way to sum that up, I think, quite well is, do you prepare the road for the kid, or do you prepare the kid for the road? And what's going on?
Exactly.
What's going on too much now is the bulldozer, for sure.
Yeah.
With politics, I know you know so much about tennis. We need to get to tennis, but with apartheid, the South African culture, South African society is so complex with all the different languages and religions. I one time was driving across the U.S. with a young South African player, and we went into an Indian reservation. And I said, apartheid was wrong, but there's a great statement: never trust government, just ask the Native American. But I wanted to ask you, this is a political question. Joel Trucker, who you know, a great writer.
Yeah. I know Joel.
He wrote one time that, white South Africans grew up where they're so politically aware. I think Brandon and I are in the same boat, both from small towns in upstate New York. My parents never looked for the key for the car because they're always in the car. And my parents didn't even have a key to the house. But, if you go through the alphabet soup, the USPTA, the PTR, the ATP, the WTA, the WTT, many South Africans, one of our students, Craig Tiley, who runs the Australian
Open, yeah.
With what are your thoughts on that? Did you grow up? Did you feel like was that through society, through the army? And actually, years ago, the Germans, the Swedes, there was lots of players that came to the U.S. that grew up and matured like you did, going to the army for 2 years. But what are your thoughts on a young South African being more politically aware than people from other countries?
I don't think it's, again, I would hate to say, oh yes, all South Africans are politically aware, because I don't think that was always the case, even when you're growing up in apartheid. When you fed propaganda and you don't know what is going on, I think, it's difficult to be politically aware internally. So I think that, like a lot of kids who are sort of grown up where you're isolated, you need to learn to, the culture was very much, during the embargoes and just because of the geographic isolation. Even now, I think a lot of the nurturing is from a different point of view. Is that one is that you have to be globally aware. You've got to be aware of everything that's happening. And not all South Africans are like this, but a lot of them are. You've got to be globally aware, which means you've got to be politically aware, and also you've probably got to work a lot harder. Because a good example is Pretorius Kukumer. He was over there, and he had to work really, really hard. And now I'm very happy for him being over in the States. But he's a very good coach. And he had to work really, really hard simply because of the fact that it was difficult for him to get over here. And I think a lot of South Africans understand that, and they understand that it takes a lot of hard work. Craig Tiley is another great example. So I think that you find a lot of South Africans who have come over and have done pretty well because their work ethic and they're, being globally aware, lends itself. I think the average American kid, and I'm a U.S. citizen, as are my kids. I think I'm very blessed to live over here. I always look at it, and I really look at it as a lottery. I was lucky to be born. I really, and I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but I really the whole thing about white privilege is very, very real, and because I've lived through it, and I was lucky. I was lucky to be born with a skin color that gave me advantages that other people didn't have, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, and when we start talking about like the whole thing about, you hear people with the Black Lives Matter, which I firmly support. You had so some people, and especially white people, would be looking at it and saying, "Oh, it's not Black Lives Matter; it's all lives matter." They don't get it. I understand. I go, hey, you know what? You're just very lucky to be born, not only born with the color of your skin, but born into the economic circumstance that you're in, into a middle class and all that. Born into being able to have the education that you have. Being born in a first world kind of country, it's very lucky. It's like you're just lucky to have what you have, and you've got a springboard. So I think that you combine that with all the other elements, with working hard, having a good work ethic, not taking anything for granted. I think that you set yourself up. You set yourself up to be successful when you're aware of all these things.
No, it's a great point. I tell juniors, certainly I drive in minivans. I've been doing that for a long time. 100 years ago, Brandon was in the minivan, is to teach perspective. I think just a good lesson or a theme is the life that people were born into. So we're driving to tennis courts and we drive by and we see people that are, mowing lawns and trimming bushes. And, same thing when you go into in this country, a coffee shop like Panera, the kid on the other side of the counter, the tennis kid especially, I think a lot of times, tennis parents is like they have $100 bills falling out of their pocket. And, and I ask kids all the time, do your parents have a money tree in the backyard? And the follow-up question, does it have $1 bills or $100 bills? And just make them stop and think about how privileged they are.
I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also just to say one thing is I think, a lot of kids, and this is in South Africa, all over, but I think that a lot of kids in the U.S. grow up, thinking that the U.S. is the center of the universe, and they're not globally aware. Like if they were to look at a map and say, point out Ukraine, which what is happening there. We have to say horrific. There are people suffering there. And we're very, again, I look at it and I go like, well, I'm so lucky where I'm at, because you could have been born and you could be over there with your family now. I mean, it is. So anyway, there's a lot of kids over here grow up and are not aware of where Ukraine is, or even, what is going on there. I think that a lot more kids in South Africa, are aware of what is going on. And they're very aware of how the economy, how the U.S. If you've got a president makes a decision, or if he, whatever the U.S. president does, doesn't just affect what is happening in the U.S. As a leader of the modern world, there's a trickle down effect, and I think that kids in South Africa live it. They live in that trickle down. So
I've heard many South Africans
I think you just grow up being more aware.
I've heard many South Africans say, "Well, we grew up on the other side of the world." No, if we Americans, if there's a geography test, we don't do very well in the backyard vision. Here's something too. I think that helps South Africans, because they're so far away from home. They're certainly not going home for the weekend. So I think that they're a long ways from home. Going way back to the 70s, I met so many South Africans, and there's always been, I think, you could tell us a problem with the exchange rate. But South Africans would come over, and they'd all, for the most part, it was like they all were given a few diamonds. If they were to hit a rough patch, their parents said, "Well, put this in your pocket. This may help you out when you really get stuck for some money." I always remember that.
Warren, you touched on white privilege, and we did a podcast now probably a couple months ago on the movie King Richard, and I thought that illustrated that same situation really well in relation to the sport of tennis, and specifically the Williams sisters. We'll get to tennis analytics and all the statistical analyses that you do on a daily basis. and what you do there and your history with that. But it'd be interesting to kind of measure, and maybe you've already done something along these lines, but measure the impact that the Williams sisters' success in the sport of tennis has had on other African American girls or boys playing the sport, and maybe something similar along the same lines with Tiger Woods in golf. But do you have any?
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
I don't have any analytics, but I mean, you also look at kids. A kid like Francis Tiafoe. With these, just his path. He has also at some point there's going to be a book written about him and his dad. I think it's fascinating. I think power to his parents and power to him, and also power to the club, for being involved. So yeah, and I think that someone like Francis or any minority athlete, has a very important. They become role models at a whole different level from any of the other players. And it seems for the most part. I mean, you've got some pretty good role models. Not perfect. We know that. But you've got some pretty good role models in American tennis. You look at, you're also looking at Sloane Stephens. You're looking at Madison Keys. There's some good players.
I'll have to get this in for Francis.
Good role models.
This in for Francis Tiafoe. I don't know him, but I was around him for 2 weeks. I know he practiced and played some doubles with my son Connor. And what a personality! No stage fright. So I was Papa Smith. See, certainly. Okay, I'm with Connor. So Connor Smith, Papa Smith.
Yeah.
But this is something that certainly could be measured. I have to take advantage of this. I read where a fellow South African, Wayne Ferreira, he really got Francis.
It's Brad's brother. Yeah.
Yeah, he got Francis off the phone. I think it's pretty much 9 to 5. You're not using your phone. You're practicing. Someone wrote an article where they were spot checking the big three: Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer. And when they were lifting weights in the gym, in between sets or in between reps, they weren't going to their phone, and they did the same spot check on 3 other younger players. And, they would, go bench press or go do some curls, and in between they were checking their phone. I have to get that in because we're anti-phone. But I love to ask kids, that's a measurement, how many hours per day of screen time. But I've heard this many times, if there was a measurement for desire. But let's circle back to, college tennis, and then you got into the tennis teaching side of it. Go through that a little bit, and then then Dartfish. I think that'll lead us into what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I played college tennis, and then I walked in. I was not going to teach tennis. I was going to do my MBA and what happened is that in Ogden, there was a coach there, a really good guy, Brad Lowe, who I learned a lot from. And he was the director of tennis, and he decided to take on a business, buy a business. And so they had a position open, and they offered me the job. And, I was young then, and it was a great opportunity. So I took that job, and I was there for 2 years, and then applied for the job up in Park City, because that opened up. And if there was one place in Utah that I really wanted to live, would it be, because it's a pretty liberal town, and it's it's beautiful. If there's one place that I wanted to live in Utah, it would be in Park City. So I applied for the job, and I wasn't under any pressure to get the job, because I had a good job already. And I probably, because of that, because I was sort of relaxed, I interviewed pretty well, and I got the job. And it was up in Park City at the club up there that, I taught tennis I was a director of tennis there for almost 15 years. And in that time, I was very much interested in technology. And that was also, in the early days, like when you start talking about the analytics and CompuTennis and then the more portable tennis analyst, a tennis analyst, the little yellow box, which I've still got one over here. And because of my I was always numbers person. I liked stats and I liked like math and all that. And but I was also very much into the motor learning part of it, and with the visual and kinesthetic learning. And so I started using video stuff. I had there was an old JVC system that had the video cameras, like a box. You had the monitor on the top with a camera, and then at the bottom was a car battery. And you'd wheel it out onto the court, and you'd film people. And you could play it back right then and there, just using the mini DV tape camera, just the VCR functions, rewind, forward. I know, Steve, you did exactly the same thing. But I was out there and I was using it. And Park City is the home to the U.S. ski team. And so a lot of these skiers used to come over as cross training. We had a program where these skiers would come over when they're in town doing their dry land training and that in the warmer months. And they play tennis, and obviously these kids are athletes. They could be good at anything they do. And there were some of them, Lindsey Barnes played tennis, Bodie Miller, Ted Ligety, a kid, Eric Schlopey. All of them were athletes. They could play any sport and be really, really good at it. And they'd come out and play tennis. And one of the kids said to me, when I was videotaping him, said, "Why don't you use dartfish?" And I was going, "What? What is that?" And I looked. I then went on and I researched it, and I found a Swiss company called Dartfish that was only involved in skiing, but they had this one technology called in the action, and in the action is basically you film. You have the camera connected to the computer, and it's filming live on a loop. And what you do then is, basically the end result is that you can have a player hit their serve and immediately review it, and also have it. And if the person knew how to use the software, is have it compared to a pro. So I could, film you, Brandon, and I could film you hit a serve. As soon as you get done hitting that serve, I could have it up on the screen next to Federer, synced up. And to me, that was mind blowing. So I had to explore it more. And why it's powerful is because it bridges visual and kinesthetic learning. And there's that phenomenon. It's actually a term you can read about. It's called the Carpenter effect. And that's where after you hit a serve or a golf ball or anything, it's like Alka-Seltzer. Is that when you put Alka-Seltzer in water, it fizzes really strongly, and then it dissipates. It goes away. And when you hit a really good drive off the tee and you're walking back to the cart, your brain has still got that Alka-Seltzer still fizzing. You can still feel what you just did. So if you could play back that drive or that serve or that stroke it's about 15 to 20 seconds after you perform the motion. So if I could play that back to you within 15 to 20 seconds, it's bridging. It's the ultimate way of bridging visual and kinesthetic learning. And then you could do it over and over, and you can make those changes. So when I heard about that, I was all over it. And I contacted Dartfish, and to cut a long story short, became their first tennis client, and eventually ended up learning the software really, really well, because I had to buy it myself. It was very expensive then. It was more expensive then than it is now. And I bought the software, and I started, becoming really, really good at technical analysis. And at the same time, I was working with the USTA with Paul Lubbers, Paul Roter. Paul Lubbers was actually, very heavily involved early on with me and Dartfish on the tennis side, on helping steer and guide the software into, because it was a broadcast software and a ski software, and they were looking to make it more of a coaching software. And anyway, so I worked with the USTA, and also then as a consultant went and did the initial endorsement with USPTA. and that was with Tim Heckler, and another South African guy. Went down, and we became an endorsee of the USPTA, and it was about that time that I went full time with Dartfish, and an interesting thing was happening in analytics at that time, because mostly driven by baseball, and this was in the days of that Moneyball. So it was with Oakland A's and Billy Beane, and they were using analytics to a whole new level. So there's two different areas of video analysis. One is on the technical side, like I just explained, with being able to show a player their stroke and that. But the second side it is in match analysis, and it's called tagging, and that is just charting but indexed to video. And that's what Major League Baseball teams, specifically Billy Beane, was doing, and that is the ability to have this great database and then search a particular player, search their stats, and then click play and watch the associated video, just the important video that represents that particular stat. And that was my job. I was in sales and training of the software for everything, for Major League Baseball, for NFL, NBA, wherever, college teams, physical therapy, but obviously I was a tennis guy at heart. So I'm always thinking about having the Moneyball system in tennis, and that's how tennis analytics got born. And I built the model, and I signed on. I thought, okay, at some point I'll get too busy with the service model, because tennis analytics even now is a service model and uses Dartfish as a tool. The software tool that you can customize and all that. And that's when I signed the contract with Novak, and at the same time I was also doing work with Sharapova, with Zvana Reva, Azarenka. Did some concierge work with Roger Rashid. Okay, it was a great guy, and did some work with him because he coached Tsonga. So I did some work with Tsonga and did some work with Dimitrov. Technical side, and then also on the tagging, and then sort of working with doing a few college teams, and eventually got too busy, and I'm still I'm no longer full time with Dartfish, but I'm still very heavily involved with the company at the moment. But I'm a consultant. But that's in about 2013. That's when tennis analytics really I don't want to say took off, because it's all organic growth. But at the moment, where we're at right now is we're working with about over 40 college teams. We work with the USTA. We do, player development. Work with Martin Blackman, Dave Ramos, and Adam Snook, and we give them the data, the tagging data for all the top US players. We work in Davis Cup, Fed Cup, Olympics, and I did that for Tennis Canada also. And my relationship with Tennis Canada then was a little bit different, because they use analytics. They should almost be a model for how analytics can be used. Because Canada is such a big country, and they're so geographically dispersed. To get kids to come to a regional camp is very difficult. So what they did was they'd have these national camps, and they got a limited budget. But I got involved with them with the 12s and 14s. And within days, I worked with Debbie Kirkwood and Bob Brett. And, Bob did a great job. He did a great job all over the place. But I went out, and basically what we were doing is talent ID, and just using data to highlight talent. So I got more and more involved with that, and then also started working with Felix, with Dennis, worked with Bianca, worked with there were a couple of other Canadians, and then also I worked with Milos. And again, just giving them analytics and oppositional scouting data, because when you're tagging, there's two different sides you can look at. You can look at one giving the player their own data for their own matches, or you can also look at the side of it is looking at what the opponents do and then matching it up. And that's where I'm at the moment is, we've evolved. We do events. We do sponsor Orange Bowl, Junior Orange Bowl. I'm at Kalamazoo. So to end off the long story of it is that now we've got this, which I'm very proud about, is that we've got this database. And the database is 12, 14, 16, 18, collegiate, challenger, and pro. I didn't just focus on the pros. We focused on the whole pathway. And that's where there's a lot of data at the moment. I'm still collecting.
Yeah, that's incredible. The whole story and also what you're doing with tennis analytics. You're obviously doing so much to bring more attention to statistics and analytics to the sport. Do you still think that the sport of tennis, outside of, say, the work that you're doing, is behind when it comes to, in comparison to other sports, when it comes to looking at hard stats?
Yeah, for sure. But there's a lot of reasons behind it. Some of it is cultural. I think a lot of coaches coach the way that they were coached, or coach the way that they coach the way that they play, or the way that they think they play. Analytics in tennis was also challenging because a soccer team or a baseball team, or you put up a camera and you film a game, and you're filming 22 players on the field in soccer, and you can do all the analytics. In tennis, if you're a college coach, you've got 6 singles going out there, and there's just one of your players who's playing. So then you've got to have 6 cameras out there. A tennis match lasts longer than a soccer match generally. Okay, and there's a lot going on in tennis. So then you've got to chart it. So let's just say that you've got the average college match is about 12 hours worth of footage. And then somebody's got to break it down. So what happens is it becomes a challenge, because the guy goes, okay, I know I want to tag it and I want to get this done, but it's going to take me, it's not going to take 12 hours, it's going to take longer than that. It's going to take 16 hours. So it's easier for me I'll do it tomorrow. And then they don't do it. And that goes back to the whole thing about, raw match footage. You see all these, even now you see parents and coaches going out there and hanging a camera up, and we know what happens with that footage. Generally, nothing happens with that footage because it's got such a short shelf life. So they'll go film a match, and then they'll say, okay, I'll go watch it next week. But next weekend they're playing another match. So then it just takes up hard drive space, and the only benefit is probably until vanity later on, where they can go look at it and say, wow, look what Johnny would look like when he was 12 years old. Now he's like 18. Look how cute he was and all that. But it is challenging. It's not, the technical analysis. I mean, even if you look at it, you guys know this. I mean, I travel around to quite a lot of academies and, see what's going on out there. And back in the day, you could understand it. You could say, hey, you should use video analysis, because it's such a powerful tool with teaching technique. These are the way people learn. There's visual, kinesthetic, auditory. What's that one? It's visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and then digital, logical. So you bridge learning processes. So why aren't you using video? And they say, oh, because I've got to buy a camera, I've got to get software and all of that. Well, nowadays, you don't even need to buy anything. It's on your phone. You don't need to have an app. You don't have to have Dartfish Express app. You don't have to have any of them. You can just film. But it's very rare when I travel out there that I see coaches filming their kids. You don't have to film them all the time. Just film them every now and again, just as a baseline. Film them hitting their serve and show them what they're doing. Show them an example. You connect it to the internet, then go back and practice. And in a few weeks' time, film them again and say, hey, take a look at how you've improved. But coaches don't, I don't see that happening, and it's kind of disappointing because there's no excuse. On the match tagging side, that's a little bit different because it takes time. So coaches also, typically coaches don't watch matches. The industry, the weakness in the industry is that when you start talking about why tennis is behind something like baseball or football or soccer even, is because the coaches on the industry, the culture in the industry is not set up for coaches to go watch matches. The coaches are going to be at their club teaching private lessons. So the kids become really good at taking lessons. And the exam that they take, they're being taught all the theory. The lesson is the theory. The exam that they take is the match that they play. But nobody's grading it. Nobody's giving any feedback. And even if a coach, so parents watch the matches and then they relay some of the information. Hey, Johnny keeps double faulting on, he's double faulting too much. And then the coach takes that information and says, okay, let's go work on your second serve. But that may not be the cause of why he's getting a double fault.
Right.
Maybe situational. So that's the other thing is that then the coach does go out and he watches a match. And he's not going to watch every match. He's going to watch a match. So he sits over there, and we see it. Charting has been around for a long time. I mean, even before CompuTennis, people take a piece of paper out there and they sit and they chart the matches. But when you're charting and you're using a piece of paper, you have to chart pretty much to keep up with the action on the court. You're charting live, okay? So the charting that you're doing is very elementary. You're not going to be looking at serve and placement, return, contact position, serve plus one, contact position and placement, and looking at all the rally lengths and counting all of them. That kind of depth you've got to be able to do after the fact. And then the other thing is, so people are charting, not everyone is charting. First of all, they sit and watch the match, and then they'll. There was a study by Hughes and Frank. It was called Notational Analysis in Sport, and they said that, and they did this across all sports: cricket, soccer, rugby, tennis. And one of the things that came out of it was said that generally a coach is less than 45% accurate in their post-match assessment as to why their player won or lost the ball, the match. Which again just means that you go your soccer team at halftime, when you tell them what to do, they should do exactly the opposite. So the challenge again in tennis is that coaches watch, but what they do is they fixate. It's natural to fixate on the highlights. So what they'll do is let's just say they'll be out there watching a match, and then they'll see their player making a rally error. And let's just say the player's missing a lot of backhand in the net. Okay, so then they make a note on this piece of paper and they say, we really got to go out and we got to go work on that stroke. And obviously the emphasis is on technical. Let's go make sure they don't miss that ball in the net anymore. They need to aim higher, and they need to add more spin. They need to put more shape on the ball, or whatever. And but what they're not looking at is what caused that error. And the cause of the error may have been 3 or 4 shots preceding that. It may have got a contributing factor may have been that their serve placement. That they serve, they're not aggressive enough on their serve. Maybe they're hitting it to the opponent's forehand, and the opponent's got control. And instead of the server drawing hitting a serve that would draw a forehand for them on the serve plus one, that they end up hitting backhands and get put behind in the count, if you will, because of their serve or because of their poor return. So a lot of those intricacies, those details, those subtleties are missed, and you only really get those when you're charting matches. And I certainly don't say that a player needs to have every single match charted. That's not realistic either. but it's got to be a process. And if you're gonna do this, if a player coach is doing it, you do it over a period of time and you do it consistently, not just like a one-time event. But we don't see coaches doing enough of that. I think the average coach likes that. Looks at it and is very interested in it. But they don't know how to take that back to apply it to their players, and definitely not to monitor their players over time and use those benchmarks. So again, a lot of challenges, but that's the world that I live in, and it's not just at the junior level. You see it at college level. It is even at the pro level. We see the same challenges, a little bit different, but yeah, it's challenging for a lot of different reasons.
I know that you work with 40 plus NCAA tennis teams, and I know that the coaches have some very strict rules with the number of hours that they can play. But again, not to be pessimistic, doom and gloom, I know a lot of times players will go through 4 years of college tennis, and the recruiting was just something said during the sales pitch. I should say the charting during the recruiting process was just a sales pitch. We're always telling people, just if you could just chart, 10 points of your serve, just randomly 10 points of your returns, the serve games, return games. Keep a database, get your own hard drive, get your own pole, get your own GoPro camera, and really become a student of the game. I think that players need to become really their own coach, and the coach should really be called, this is my tennis compass. This is a person who's giving me directives or directions. But Braden used to always say that you want to chart matches to get objective data on how to structure practice. So the tennis court's a mistake center. Yep. What are the mistakes you're making, and if they're not pointed out? But I think for years you could comment on this, that tennis coaches, they didn't have the budget, and a tennis coach would be watching, a college coach, they'd be watching 6 matches. Maybe there was just one coach and 6 matches, where basketball was 6 coaches in 1 match. But no, I think for people to get the feedback, I mean, if there's 50 points in a set, and then there's, say, 5 patterns. I mean, the little kids, they're missing a serve, they're missing a return, they're missing a forehand, missing a backhand. Maybe the other pattern is they're going for a home run derby on their forehand from the wrong place, and it's just the patterns were repeated. And they do that at age 10, and they're doing the same thing at age 11, and they really get stuck in the mud. But they don't know that until they get down the road.
Yeah, and I think that we hear this all the time. It's like, I just don't have the budget, and you go like, no, you can do this. There are apps out there. I mean, we help with the work at Dartfish, and we've got that app, the Dartfish Note app. You can go chart matches yourself, and it doesn't cost you. It's not going to cost you a whole lot. It costs you in time. Okay, that's the number one thing. It does take time, but even if you're sitting watching the match, you can get that information. It's just that it's ironic is that we in the teaching industry, we expect that our students need to make change. It's always that change equals pain, and we go out there and, like Vic used to even say, it takes so many hours to develop a new motor skill and all that. So we demand this of our kids. We go out on the court and we say, in order for you to become better at your skill and all that, you need to make change. You got to change your grip. You got to do this. You got to do that. But coaches are very reluctant to apply that same philosophy in their professional development. They go like, no, well, yeah, change is pain. It's too painful, so I'm just not going to change. I'm just going to keep doing things the way I've always done it. So we see that a lot. Also that it's just too difficult for a coach to make. It's easy to make excuses, and budget to me is one of the excuses. You don't have to get full level professional analytics, but you should be doing it. And the analytics, like you just said, Steve, it's the analytics, the numbers that should be driving the practice court. not the other way around. But hey, it's getting better. You're getting more and more coaches that are, when you start seeing successful teams, when the top teams, use it. And again, you'll get coaches who will say, oh, well, it's like, those successful teams, they can use it. They can afford to use it. And they have the budget and all that. But you also have to tell them, to say, well, it's because they started using it that they became successful. They had to, at some point there, to make that decision to say, hey, we're going to change the way we're doing things. And it's difficult. It's like even on that goal setting, all these coaches are pretty much into that whole thing of saying, oh, we need to have these player development profiles. So we're going to do goal setting. And we all know it's like, hey, you've got to have short-term goals, medium-term goals, long-term goals. So they come up with this for the kids. They'll say to them, okay, a good goal, you need to, tell them what your goals are. It must be realistic and attainable is one of the tenets of goal setting. And another important one, it must be measurable. So they go through this whole exercise with their kids with goal setting, but then they fail to measure their kids' performance. And kids are judged on outcomes. At the moment, it's like if your rating goes up or your ranking goes up, and you're winning more than you're losing, then you must be improving. Good job. But if your ranking drops or you have a few losses, the inverse is or the converse is then should be true. And we know that that's not the case. You can lose a few matches and you can still be improving. Your ranking can be going down and you could still be improving. So how do you measure that pathway? And at the moment, that player development pathway from 12 to 14 to 16 to 18 is always judged on wins and losses, rankings and ratings. And there's a much better way to do it. There's a much more accurate way. And that goes back to the talent ID that we used for Tennis Canada. It is based on performance, not an outcome. And performance, there are lots of different metrics that you can benchmark. You can say, hey, what is the difference between a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old when it comes to serve percentages, serve win percentages and placements? What are the best kids doing? How is that different from what a 14-year-old is doing? Is it different for the girls and the boys? What about the forehand? What about the rally length? What about, you can ask all these questions, but you have to have that data. And the benchmarking data is there. But benchmarking is great. Only works if you are accurately measuring what your own player is doing. Because then you can benchmark. Then you can tell your kid, you can say, okay, yeah, you're above the line, on the line, or below the line. And if you're below the line, then that's what we need to work on that practice course.
I always tell people to skip rope and a jump rope, whatever you call it, skip rope or jump rope. It doesn't cost that much, and either does a clipboard. From Bill Jacobson, we just take the balls hit three ways, plus, minus, IP, point ends three ways, plus, plus, minus, minus, minus F. Mm-hmm. And just make a T chart, a plus column and a minus column. And just when you're, at a tournament with a group of people you practice with, to say, hey, go chart 10 points on the serve, 10 points on the return. We've talked quite a bit on the podcast about the late Jim Verdick. The only person I know who all the time, if he was watching tennis on TV, he would chart the points. And I think there's two types of talk. There's at a tournament or even watching tennis on TV, sometimes even the commentators, there's bleacher talk and fact-finding information. And, what is really going on. And I do think that the tennis audience, and it's not to beat up on any of the commentators, and granted, it's only two people. It's not like a soccer game or a football game. And I know you comment on this where there's so many people on the court. Like, what just happened with that football play? What just happened with one one group versus the other group playing soccer. But yeah, I think that there should be definitely more charting.
Yeah, and just to add to that is that, you've got to be very careful about, back in the day, and all of us were charting, charting matches and that. But we got to be very careful about viewing match stats in isolation, because you can be sitting charting and you chart a really good match on one day, and then you don't chart them the next day and they play a bad match. You need to be able to aggregate data. So that's what is that is a big evolution, if you will. The next is a big jump in analytics in all sports was the ability to aggregate, which when Bill Jacobson, who is another South African, when he designed CompuTennis, it didn't have the power. The charting and the template that he used is very powerful, but he didn't have the ability then to easily aggregate data over time, and then because at the moment the tools we've got, we're using, we chart the matches, and our actual charting system is pretty much very similar to what CompuTennis was doing. We have all these metrics, all these errors that we're charting, but that all gets put onto a SQL database. I didn't have that then. So it gets up, a person charts it, and it gets uploaded. At the same time, that match the video gets uploaded, and it's got the same tags on it, and then the two of them are linked. So we've got a SQL database, and we link the data to the stats to the video, and we have the added tool or the power of having a data visualization tool, which we use. There's a bunch of them. There's Click, Tableau, Domo. Microsoft has Power BI. We use a couple of them, and they sit on top of everything. And then it allows the coach or us to sit and drill down, basically do what if, what about this, what about that. I want to go take a look at all of Zverev's serves on when he was behind in the count from 4 games, all against the 6'8" lefty. And you can pull that data up and you can look at it, because the ability to search or drill down in data allows you to identify tendencies, and that's what when you're only viewing when you're charting matches in isolation, those stats are very valuable, but only right then and there. This is what you did well. This is what you did well or badly to win or lose on that day. So when you take 50 matches or 20 matches in that, and you aggregate the data, and then you say, hey, do you realize that on a 30-all point, you always miss your first serve, and whenever you serve a second serve, you serve it to the same position. Do you know that your win percentage on a 30-all point is much lower than any other point score? But that's very powerful, because then you can try to figure out what it is. Is it something technique? Is it something to do with confidence and mental toughness? Is it happening at 4-all in a match? Does it happen more at a certain stage in a match? Has it got to do with endurance? So there's a lot of things that tendencies allow us to find out about our players. And it's also those tendencies again that are really, really important when we do oppositional scouting. So oppositional scouting, you can say to a player, like I've been doing some work with Brandon Nakashima. We worked with them where they want to match the opponent from the previous round, and not Brandon, but I'm just saying some coaches will say, hey, I just want to take a look at the match from the previous round, and there's a danger in that, because you can come to the wrong conclusions, because that may have been a great day for that player, and also he's playing against a different player. So you come up with all these. You cannot get accurate tendencies by looking at just the previous round. So when we've got a database now, which Bill Jacobson didn't have the luxury of having, we have the ability then to say, let's go look at that opponent, and you're playing so and so. in your next round, and we've got the last 10 matches, or 10 matches on hard court against right-handers, against with similar opponents. And now you aggregate and you pull up a report, and then you start finding some very interesting things, because we know is that like baseball, found out. I mean, is that under moments of stress, people become very predictable. Just nature. They're going to go that generally they're going to go with what is comfortable for them in that situation, whether they realize it or not. And that's why I think that this the whole idea, I had to bring up the whole thing and saying that aggregation of data is where the power of analytics lies, not just charting. And certainly charting a match, charting a match is better than not charting it at all.
With Bill Jacobson, he's 85 years old. What a gentleman, like yourself, and intellectual. I used CompuTennis for 17 years. I believe it was 82, 83, and then Y2K. Didn't really, after 2000, it really dropped off. But when Bill had his CT 120, it was, I think, $3,500. The price never went down. And I believe that he sold less than 200 units. And then he developed a software package where people could chart on paper. Actually, we had Carlos Goffi on, and he came up with the red light, yellow light, green light points.
Yeah.
And I think it was 1,100 people bought the software package. And the only reason I mention that, again, I come across so many times the doom and gloom. I think when you're honest, it just sounds like negative. It sounds almost rebellious. But people have to, just be interested in charting. I think that years ago in America, when baseball was bigger, it's not as big as it once was. That mentality of baseball, people just knew stats. The term "be managed by stats, not by score." I have told tennis parents. I hear them tell the story. It's like the fish gets bigger and bigger. I caught a 4 foot fish, but like my child double faulted 19 times, and they're just telling the story, but they didn't chart it. They're just pulling the number out of the sky, and they're kind of beating their kid up. Well, I think you double faulted 21 times. The next time they tell the story, it's 22. But that expression, just the facts, Jack. Coming back to Jacobson, I'm not going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I know. This is what happened. It's really interesting that when you interview a player after the match, Jacobson would do that. You ask them what happened. Of course, now today we hear a lot of sound bites, but do the players and do the coaches of the players really have an idea on what happened when the match is over?
Yeah, I mean, at least at the pro level, when we go to, when we're at Wimbledon and, we're at US Open and even at Australian Open, if you go in, all the coaches have got access to all the stats and, pretty in depth. It's pretty amazing at the, at the pro level what coaches have got access to right now. But the average, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, or even college coaches don't have access to that information. Sometimes also, the whole thing is that the interpretation of the data, for a coach becomes an art. It's a coaching skill, because you've got to be very careful when you're not just going to pull up all the stats and give it to your player. That analysis paralysis is very real. So depending on and it goes back to what Vic used to do with Stephen Nienagel, with brain typing, and that is going, or even Myers-Briggs personality testing is going. Different personality types handle that, will become stats and all that will become much more daunting. When we were at Wimbledon and working with Milos, he wanted to sit down and look at all the stats. It was in his genetic makeup that he's not going to have analysis paralysis. He wants to know. The other players who you're not going to do, you want to do that guided discovery and maybe first look at the stats and then filter certain things to them. So it goes back to the whole thing is that the coach, or the team is going to become the new art in coach is, how to interpret data. And there's also, a very big danger when you've got all these numbers to be selective about what you look at. Because you can look at the data and something jumps out at you and that's all you look at or you fixate on. It can be very dangerous. So I think that the new coaches are going to look at the whole picture, look at all the stats.
One of the best stories, I believe I heard this from you. I like to keep track of where I learned something. I think if you make it a story, this is who taught me this is when and where, instead of pretending that it's your own. But Milos Raonic was playing in Spain. He was playing futures, and he's banging serves. And he was told, "Hey, kid, you're not here to bang serves. Just spin the serve in and, work on your defense, work on your play from the backcourt." I think also knowing stats with drills, like say, for example, you play 4 off the serve, like 4 and 4, serve 4, return 4, and just keep your own score. If you win a point at the net, it's +3. And if you win a point at the baseline, it's +1. And of course, you just go +3. You flip it around. If you're at the net, you get more points. So just try to do something to encourage people to go forward. I want to ask you about Craig O'Shaughnessy and the brain game, but before that, to go way back to the beginning, like say first 4 shots, I think really the beginning analytics are the numbers that apply to grip, swing, body. This is the angle of the racket face. This is the angle of the racket path. This is the distance, how far the racket is away from your body. This is how far the racket fell. And because once you have those numbers in place, it's like all these greats that we talk about, like Welby Van Horn. He was asked numerous times. I heard Welby, somebody would say, "Will you talk to us about strategy?" And he would just go, "No." It could be an adult at one of his tennis camps. And he said, "I'm not going to talk to you about strategy until you have strokes." And, granted, I think Brad Gilbert, I love to listen to Gilbert. And, you get to a certain point when you're someone like Gilbert, who is once quoted saying, I don't do grips, and he's working with players that are on the tour. And I think that's a whole different side of it. But could you comment on the beginning players with, and I know you've already touched upon it a little bit, but how important that is as far as having options. If a kid doesn't have the right grips, they're not going to be able to play doubles. They're not going to be able to go to the net.
Yeah, at some point, no matter how good a player gets, at some point, poor technique or inefficiency in technique is going to come back and haunt them. And it's either going to be lucky. It's going to be if they're lucky, it's just going to be that they lose. Or it's going to come back and it's going to haunt them because of injury. So good technique and strategy are intimately linked. Good technique enables you to execute strategy. No doubt about it. Okay. Technique, though, we know in player development, we all know in motor learning that technique has got to be pretty sound by the time you're 14. So 14 is, and it's not saying you cannot learn technique later on. We see it with players all the time. I did all the filming with Novak when he changed his serve. But players change it. Tiger Woods changed his swing when they're number one in the world. Okay, but it's very difficult. The easiest time is because we don't have to get into all of this, is that building myelin and all of that, which I know you know a lot about. Happens very early on when the hard drive, when the computer program is still fairly empty. It's easier to program, and that happens in the 12 to 14 year stage. You work with strategy. The emphasis on strategy is less than it becomes later on. There's a switch from the 12s, 14s to the emphasis on development is on technique in the early ages. And then it switches to strategy later on. But again, it's like when you're in 16s and 18s, you shouldn't be working a whole lot on technique. Maybe you're just working on minor tweaks on that in an ideal world. but yeah, you've got to have that foundation. It's got to be sound very, very early on. And we see this now in analytics. We'll break down a match, and you can go back and you can say that what was it that caused this player to lose? And very rare, almost always, you can back it, backtrack, and you can say it's either because there's poor strategy, which at the top levels there's usually not. Okay, it's less the case. But at the top levels, you can always go back and you can look in the matchup and you can look at it and look at technique. And you can say, okay, yeah, this guy has a really weird looking forehand and he takes back and all of that, and he may hit with tremendous spin. He may be getting showing players something that they've never looked at. But pretty much it's like a comet or it's like a meteor. Okay, they very short lived, and then either the player gets injured or other players start reading it and just go like, hey, it's like there's an inefficiency here. And then they start exploiting it. And that's one of the things also when we're doing oppositional scouting is you'll back it and you'll say, why? You back it up and say, if a player's losing, it's usually because of inefficiencies in technique, or it could be something, like I said, in mental toughness and confidence. It could be in movement, or it could be in endurance. And it's not always just one or the other. It's usually a combination. But yeah, absolutely. It's like if I look at what I've learned, from the analytics side now, I'd be going, and I was, counseling a parent, I'd be going like, make sure that whoever your kid is taking lessons from early on in the 12s and 14s knows how to teach technique and doesn't do and doesn't teach them a palm up serve like I have. Because it's a limiting factor and it will haunt you at some point.
No, I've heard you say before that not in naming any academies, but when you were primarily just selling dartfish or managing dartfish in the tennis world, that you'd go from one academy to the next, and you felt like telling kids, put your rackets in your shoulder bag and run away as fast as you can. Because I want
to say that the best way for you to improve is to put your racket in your bag and run.
Just run the other way. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting talking about, technique and strategy and when these moments of emphasis are. I think if you then add the physical side to it, if a player is, say, winning based on their ability to keep a lot of balls in the court and they're not forcing. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell and the Outliers, how the last 9 out of 10 record holders in the 100-meter sprint in the Olympics were the youngest in birth order. And I think a player who just has no options in terms of being offensive, whether it's their technique or their coach who's maybe pushing them to win rather than develop, they'll actually have issues with not having the strength in the legs or the trunk, say that the fast twitch muscles and the ability to hit the ball with enough RPMs or power to play at the next level. And so that's, I think, another interesting twist on all this. But like you said, you have to have the data to figure this stuff out. And I think that comes back to, you had mentioned the cultural side of the sport. And I think also the financial side of the sport. It comes back to, where we're at as a sport culturally, and as players are developing. As juniors, that's when the coaches are watching their matches the least. At least the college coaches are paid to be there, and the pro coaches, say at the futures level, of course, there's probably not many players at the futures level or challengers level who can afford a full-time coach. And then the pro level, once you get to the ATP, WTA Tour, well, those guys have already pretty much made it. And so, what are we going to do to help junior coaches, have the ability to get out there and get hard data, hard stats, on junior players. I mean, those are my thoughts. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but what are your thoughts on kind of that side of it, just to where we are as a sport, and maybe the financial side of all that?
Yeah, there's no doubt, I mean, that it is still, it's the barriers to entry, pretty high in tennis. It's an expensive sport. So, a lot, and then again, you also face the fact that a lot of the best athletes then, one is because they don't have the money, they gravitate towards some of the other team sports, basketball. So dealing with that also, I think also is that the other issue that we've got, and I think it's probably more pronounced in tennis, is the internet. One is kids spending having too much time on their spending too much time just on the internet, but also when it relates to tennis, just seeing all the information, the video, the fake news, if you will, that is out there. So a lot of these kids and even parents, go on and they say, they look at what is available on YouTube and all that, and they see these sometimes pretty well known coaches, and or they see professionally made content. It looks very, very good, and if the content is professionally made, or if this guy's got a name, that it must be true. So then they looking at that as gospel, and then taking that out onto the court with their kids. And we all know is like there's a lot of people who become experts overnight because of the internet. So my big thing is just to say, hey, be very careful about trusting everything that you watch online, especially when it comes to technique.
One thing with just analytics, the study of certainly a statistical analysis from a match, but just in hearing your story for our listeners. So you grow up playing soccer. In your younger years, you spent hours and hours on the backboard. And you grew up in a time, if you did have private lessons, it was just that you weren't programmed out and you tried to play as many matches as possible. So being from South Africa, there's a lot of sunshine. I think people from Johannesburg, I know enough people that way back in the day, the altitude is high and should have wore more sunscreen. But today I was on the court with two Canadian boys, one from Montreal and one from Toronto, a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. 16-year-old hits the ball really well. He's been taught by, he's been in what we call a system of systems. From the get-go, when he started, he plays really well. But I just told these two guys, I said, let me tell you how it works. Being in Canada, it's a long, long winter. So many times you're on the court with 6 players. And a lot of times these kids at indoor programs, they'd be better off to do some work with the program, but just rent courts really late at night and play sets. So what I was doing, because they're just blasting balls, of course, we had a Russian coach add to the drill. I said, all right, guys, this is going to be like a basketball score. Every time there's an unforced error, the game's over. Like you just lose the game. Even if you're ahead 40-11, but you make the unforced error. And not to have these guys push, but just realize, guys, in football, if it's a fumble, it's a turnover, everybody in the stadium knows, uh-oh. And these kids are just blasting balls. I think that's one thing, too, is if someone's taking lessons where the coach, and this was the way it was in Europe for years, is the coach just had 6 balls. But if a coach is out there with 300 balls, people don't think anything of making a mistake. So I had these boys playing, and they were basically missing backcourt to backcourt. And they just, I mean, the score is going to go up quite high. The games are going to fall fast. But actually, then the Russian coach I work with said, okay, after every unforced error, you got to do 10 squat thrusts. It just to get people to stop and think. Because when you make an unforced error, I mean, I tell people you got to win 2 to be in the positive. And it's really just, many times, as Braden would say, it's just a comedy of errors. Backcourt error after backcourt error. But in leading into that, tell us a little bit about Craig O'Shaughnessy. I remember Dave Fish talking to me about him when he was really young, that he has techie skills and he's a very good writer. I know recently had an article, I think it was called The Big Lie, where people don't go to the net. Could you elaborate upon that and how you work with Craig and that background?
Yeah, so I've worked with Craig for a long time, and we actually, we have a couple of, he has BrainGameTennis.com, and we actually have a couple of joint products, data products that use my data, and we broke them down, and one of them is 1 million points in college tennis, which we launched a couple of years ago, a year or so ago, and then the other one was just called Game Plan. But I've worked with Craig over the years, and he's still he's a client of mine. He's a great friend of mine, and he's also a client. And with all the players he works with, I mean, we do the charting and give him the data, which he then interprets. So he's very good at that, and he's very good at writing. So him and I had similar backgrounds growing up, and so it's always good to work with him quite closely on a lot of this data stuff. What is your question again? So sorry, Steve, you'd asked about the net.
Yeah.
Yeah. He looked at the net and all that, and was going like. He looked at all the actual numbers and the winning percentage, but he's looking at it as the pros. So what I've done is I've done the same thing. We actually I just did a study. I did a presentation for the USPTA a week ago, and what I did was I took all the data from Orange Bowl. So this was the 12 through the 18, and on net appearance, and I'm just going to bring it up over here. On net appearance, even the loser wins more points than they wins more points when they go to the net than they lose. So what I started doing is instead of looking at the averages, all the stats that you see when you're doing benchmarks is on average. That takes the winners' numbers and the losers' numbers and divides them by 2. So what we started looking was saying, wait a minute, I don't want to look at it like that. I want to look at what is it that the match winner does. So I come up with a database of the match winners' stats, and I come up with a database of the match losers' stats. So in every match, so there's 127 matches in the draw, and there's 127 winners, and there's 127 losers. So I segment that data. And it was interesting, when we looked at that, the winners obviously win more than the losers, but on average, it's about, in the boys, it's about 60% of the time that they go, the average, okay, 60% of the time that they go to the net, they're going to win. A lot of it is freebies, because they go to the net and the ball doesn't even come back. They don't even have to hit a volley. The match loser is, for the boys 12, they broke even. Boys 14, 50, they win 53% of all net appearances. Boys 16, 59%. Boys 18 at the Orange Bowl, 55%. Even with the girls, 53, 55 for the match the losers. But on average, when we just look at an average of all of them, you can roughly say, you win 2 out of every 3 points when you go to the net. So you'd be going like, why? That's a very, very powerful stat. So you're going like, you need to learn, you need to go to the net. And a lot of players, unfortunately, they don't go to the net when they're younger because they're worried about getting passed. And so what they do is their coaches will say, don't worry, when you're 14 or 15, you can start going to the net. But let's just go in the lesson. They feed them a canned approach shot. The kid hits a nice slice backhand down the line, and then they go to the net and they hit that textbook volley, everything done. And you say, that's not what's happening in a match. In a match, your opponent is trying to hit the ball away from you. He's trying to hit the ball at your feet. He's trying to hit the ball at your head. You need to learn how to volley those. And when you're in a lesson, your coach is not going to be firing balls at your body. What they're going to do is it's going to be very controlled. So the way you get better coming to the net is to do it when you're younger, because you get past and you learn from it, and you get those low volleys, you get those it's very rare that players hit that textbook volley. You're just stabbing at the ball and all of that, but yes, it's important to work on the technique for sure. I'm not saying don't do that, but you need to go to the net when you're 12 years old. Because going to the net when you're 12 years old makes you better when you're 14, makes you better when you're 16, makes you better when you're 18.
Yeah, we always say
the numbers are overwhelming in favor of going to the net.
We always say the person at the 12 and unders, the one who hits the most overheads is doing the best. I know Jose Garris, the famous player from Spain, top 10 in the world, has done so much with the USTA. I'm sure you've spent hours and hours with him.
I work with him. I've done a lot of work with Jose, yeah.
With that, what he says about the 12s is somebody's got to win. It's just, parents shouldn't be climbing the fence. In the sport I grew up, if you're 12, you're playing peewees. I mean, I think the division before that is squirt. So it's not high performance. With Craig O'Shaughnessy, he's like yourself, a great speaker. I have to plug Vic Braden here again. Is when you've been in the game such a long time, you're like one phone call away from talking to anybody. So Kim Wittenberg, we met years ago working for All American Sports. We talked to Chuck Creasy. I mean, he's a little older than I am. A couple years he started with All American Sports. So then through Kim, I coached his younger brother, Scott. Now, Scott and Craig were college teammates. And the Braden influence, I mean, Dustin Brown, a little loosey-goosey with some of his mechanics, but I remember Craig was at Wimbledon with Scott, and that's where Dustin Brown beat Rafa.
Played Nadal.
He played
Nadal.
Nadal. And, one thing, Jason Jung was here the other day to say hello, and he played at Michigan, and I think he's cracked, or pretty close to have been top 100 in the world, and Michigan grad, so top school, and we're talking about Max Cressy, and how much he's going to net. And I said, it's kind of sad that everybody's just talking about it because it's like a freak of nature. Now, I know he spent time with Matt Clore and Andy Fitzell. He spent time at the place I had him in Orlando. And Jason said, yeah, but he's got a big serve. And I just said, I wish you didn't say that. Of course he's got a big serve, but the thing is that you just got to understand the court's 27 feet wide, 130 degrees potential angle. The language from Jacobson, the aggressive air margin, if you win 2 out of 3, 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12. But it's just amazing. Granted, kids at a younger age, they go to net to lose at a faster rate. But it's, all the way to the big time. And now, I mean, it's just amazing where people are not even serving volley in doubles. Could you comment on that? I mean, in charting too, I think that's where doubles is, I mean, forget it. I mean, people aren't charting doubles. Not at the grassroots.
Yeah, we chart a lot of doubles. And in fact, most recently, I mean, we also chart. We do all the scouting, even for doubles. It's become, it's much more important for during the Olympics and even last weekend. I mean, we chart a lot of doubles for the Davis Cup, but for college, it's very important. So we chart doubles also, and yeah, it is shocking for me to see players playing doubles and on the serving team standing 2 back. It is shocking, and we see it. We see it all the time, and it's fine. Every now and again, if we know it's like if the server's got a really big serve, that returners will adopt that 2 back strategy, but we even see it on the serve. So yeah, it goes back. It's for all of those kids. They don't know what they're missing out on. But the problem is that it's too difficult to change his pain again. It's too difficult for them to change. And most college coaches, unlike Matt, was where they're going to develop kids. When they get there, most college coaches are just they want to get a kid who they don't need to develop. They want the kid to come out there, and if the kid is a baseliner, is not going to go to the net, then hey, that's what they're going to end up. They're going to start playing college like that, and that's how they're going to end playing. But yeah, I always go back and just say that when you're at college, it's not like it's too late, but it would be much easier to fix to address when they were younger, when they were 12, 13, 14. But yeah, doubles is, and also it's like the other thing is that juniors should play more doubles, because if they don't just enter the singles tournament, doubles gives you an opportunity to work on your net game. So, but a lot of kids don't play doubles. So it's kind of like it's a catch-22. So,
yeah, returns too. I mean, get the ball away from the net person. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, no, we talked to Chuck Creasy, and I don't know if you know Chuck personally, but
yeah, I do know Chuck. Yeah.
Okay, so he was big on talking about how there's the changing of the scoring system in doubles, talking about no-ad scoring, 6-game sets, and even how that might trickle into professional doubles. Or the no-ad scoring obviously already has. What's your kind of take from a statistical standpoint on no-ad scoring in these shorter sets? And I've seen junior tournaments they're playing 4-game sets, and of course 10-point tiebreakers almost now are always the case in place of third sets for junior tennis. Could you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
So obviously I'm not a proponent for shortening everything. Like we also now get fast 4 and all of that, which is sad that it gets to that. Like even in college, I mean, college, but you have to understand, there's a much bigger picture. There's arguments on both sides. Statistically, with the whole thing with no ad scoring and ad scoring and no ad, there's actually not a significant difference in how the sets come out, whether they play it out, whether they serve a game out and play regular scoring, or if they play no ad. I think that for everyone, it's a big point, and so you play that point. Arguably you'd be saying that you play that no ad point, with a lot more. On both sides of the court, you play with a lot more intensity than what you would play at deuce court, because you don't have another option. So, I need to actually revisit that, because we did that a couple of years ago. We did a study on college tennis just to see if the deciding point, the 3-0 point, if it favored the server or the returner, compared to compared to a regular scoring, and we didn't find that there was anything statistically significant in the difference. The server had the upper hand.
I spent a lot of time what's called the Battle of Boca Raton, UTR money tournament, and this past weekend, one of the players we're coaching, he won the first game in his mind because he thought they were playing no ad, but they were playing ad, and they were playing ad. Regular scoring in the main draw, not the consolation bracket. So then what happened is they yelled over to the referee, and they played a very long game, the first game. And this young player that we're working with, he totally revealed himself because it went do sad. And I think sometimes the ego is so fragile and people start off a match. So he had the Nick Bollettieri thing, if our player had walked around the net post and he was up 1-love, but it went do sad, and I said that game was so long, it lasted like 15 to 18 minutes, and I said, you just told the guy all about yourself. Going back to Lynette Federer, you showed a chink in your armor. He just showed that he was just emotionally capable of unraveling. But I do think that the shorter the scoring system, for sure, the greater chance for an upset. And Chuck really preaches is to. The fitness, obviously he's a fitness maniac, which is a positive. But I loved what he said about if you're going to play the 10-point tiebreaker, play it for the first set. And so then the third set is a true set. My son Connor's playing a match for Ty Tucker, Ohio State, and he got down. He won the first set. He got down like 4-1, and he just started intentionally losing. And then Ty comes over, what are you doing? He goes, I am not playing a 10-point tiebreaker. I'm going to lose this set and win this thing in 3. I think it's so sad that you work on fitness all the time, and And I think it's because we're lazy. I think that we're going home early. I mean, why do we have to play a 10-point tiebreaker? But that's unfortunate. The government, who makes those decisions? It's just sad.
Yeah, I think that goes all the way up. That's, it's ITF. I mean, that's, well, we're not in college tennis. In college tennis, obviously, the NCAA is they make those rules with direction from the Intercollegiate Tennis Association.
Coming back to Chuck, though, I think it was for 15 years where they played no ad in college tennis, but the college coaches were okay with that because they could play as many matches as they wanted. They weren't limited to 25 days, so that's another thing too. But again, a lot of the rules obviously are positive for the student athlete, the academic side. So there was too many coaches years ago who said, just get C's and get your degree. We're not too interested in the academic side. Go ahead, Brandon.
No, go ahead, Steve.
I could do this. The language of charting. I understand first 2 touches, first 4 shots, serve +1. But could you comment on this? For me, when you have these, players in their formative years, they're playing, they're 10 years old, and they hear serve +1, for example, and they're arching their back, they're tossing the ball over their head, they're hitting what they think is an effective serve because the trajectory makes the ball bounce high. They're later obviously going to have no speed on their serve, but in 10 and 12s, it doesn't really matter. And then they're running around and just everything's a forehand. So I think sometimes the language of charting, and when you hear what the pros are doing, obviously serve and return is huge. But we know that little kid tennis and big kid tennis are 2 different sports. I mean, for little kid tennis, the serve, although you want to teach the best possible mechanics, so they eventually have a great serve, but it's just a point starter. But, so when kids hear, first 4 shots and they're just playing home run derby, and I quote Chris Clure all the time, they're just trying to launch missiles. Could you comment on that and how sometimes what we hear about pro tennis shouldn't be applied to little kid tennis?
Yeah, I think at all levels. I mean, even the technical side, we still do the work. We do the technical assessments or the side-by-side comparisons with the kids that's going to the USTA national camps, comparing them to pros, and we still often do that. And yeah, sometimes on the technical side is that first of all it's not good to have a 12-year-old compared to a pro. There's too much missing in between from the growth and the development, the physical development perspective. So it's better. It would probably be better when we create reference lives. There's been a lot of debate about this. Is to say that the ideal way would be to have a 12-year-old compared to a really good 14-year-old, and a really good 14-year-old compared to a really good 16-year-old. So on the technique side. Now, on the terminology on the match analysis side, and saying that and can you still hear me? Because I think my headset just died.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, let me just. I'm going to have to switch over here. Well, if this dies, then I'll switch to my phone. On the terminology, obviously, I think everyone knows serve +1, return +1, and all of that. Just the second shot after the return, and the whole thing. The question here was more about like saying, should a 12-year-old, be working on what the pros are working on, like a serve +1, the strength of the forehand, and only hitting forehands. I think you're going to be very careful, like I said earlier on, in misinterpreting the data and getting confused about like saying taking it as an absolute, like for example the rally length. I think people early on when we were doing this, even in the juniors, people would hop all over Craig and I about the first 4 shots, the importance of the first 4 shots, because when people interpreted what that the majority of rallies end within 4 shots, what they heard was that, I should only work on my players on short rallies. I shouldn't worry about the long rallies. But that was never ever what was said. Because if you look at it, if you're good at a long rally, you're probably going to be good at a short rally. And that in the development stages, yes, you need to work on those longer rallies because you develop stamina, you're developing movement, you're developing court skills, you're doing all those things. But the fact is, there are some universal truths about the sport that have to be acknowledged. And that is, one is that the sport is, we play a game of errors. There are 3 times as many errors as there are winners in all junior levels of tennis. It's slightly lower at the pros. But generally, there's 3 winners to every error. 3 errors to every winner. The other thing is that our sport is ruled by short rallies. The dominant rally length is 1 to 4. It doesn't matter whether you're girls 12 on playing on clay or whether you're a pro. In fact, the better you get, the shorter the rallies are. But that doesn't say that all the important rallies happen on short points. We did look at that and said, well, is it, are some of the big points happening more on longer rallies than on shorter rallies? And there was no evidence to suggest that the important points happen at all rally lengths. So you do have to be good at all rally lengths. The other thing is, the other universal truth is that, the winner of the match, on average, the winner of the match is winning, 55, 56% of points. So it's an imperfect sport. So you're not going to win 100% of all the points you play. The number 1 player in the world wins 53 to 55% of all points they play. So juniors growing up, you need to look at that. You need to say, hey, you're going to make errors. That's how you handle the making errors or the losing points and all of that will define you as a player. And going back to the surplus one, in our sport, it doesn't matter what the age is. The forehand is generally the weapon. The forehand is the strength over the backhand. That's how the numbers show it. As the player gets older, the forehand becomes more of a strength. I think, Craig, the analogy Craig makes is that the forehand is the sword and the backhand is the shield. Now, again, that can be misinterpreted because a lot of coaches will go back to that first 4 shots and say, hey, you know what? As a 12-year-old, I've got to work on a player hitting a forehand every single surplus one. And if you look at that logically and you look at that from a developmental point of view, you'd be saying all you're doing is you're probably making the backhand an even bigger weakness. So you don't make a weapon stronger, and then your sword, you don't get a bigger sword and a smaller shield. That doesn't make you a better player. You need to work on them equally, but you do need to know, and we see this even at the girls 12, is that if we do look at where players are hitting winners or hitting winners from, they hit more winners on the forehand side than they hit on the backhand side. It's just numbers.
A couple of things to follow up on that. I think the shield and sword is a very good analogy, but the shield being the backhand, if you never hit a backhand, you're not going to have a shield. I mean, if you've got to work both on strengths and weaknesses. Another thing I think, through your research and O'Shaughnessy's writing, I share with people all the time that for 10 years, I believe this is accurate, for 10 years, Federer and Nadal, they show up at the US Open, so they've played 8 months on the circuit, and they were always at 55, like 55.2, 55.3. But I think that the Joe Public thinks that Nadal and Federer, Djokovic, that they're just rolling people. They're just winning so easily. But I like how you say universal truths and imperfect game. But a question on equipment. We mentioned the connection with O'Shaughnessy and the Wittenberg boys. They both work for Braden. And I remember you had an ad when you were with Dartfish. Vic Braden would be in a room with 100 people, and they were all there to listen to him. And Vic would, he'd come in and go, "Hi, I'm Vic." But he had an ad that you put together. "Hi, I'm Vic. I Dartfish." But I remember you complimenting and saying, "Yeah, Braden was basically doing 30 years ago what we're doing today." But with the equipment, kids are not playing with a wooden racket. But what's your thought on when you hear pros say, well, because of the equipment, because of the strings? I've heard the Fed say, well, everybody really fears the low backhand or the low volley, backhand or forehand. But what's your thought on, the equipment's changed so much that the game's evolved where you can't go to the net? You think there's some truth to that someone has to really, really mix it up more where you can't be a pure serve and volleyer?
I think, if we even take if we look at even like say 10 years ago when the debate started and all that about net play and all that, first though, just to backtrack is there's no doubt that the equipment, that the modern equipment has changed the game, more so for the junior player and for the recreational player. But if you do look at the weighting of the pros and all that, the racket Stefan Edberg was playing with, the pro staff, the 6.1 is fairly similar to what they're playing with now. Now, before that, with the wood racket, between, like say, so with the racket at Edberg, and even I think McEnroe was at one of those players where he went through his career. He saw the greatest change in equipment, because he was playing with wood rackets with a max fly, and then at the end he was playing with a fairly modern racket with a Dunlop. I definitely think it makes it easier for kids to do everything, to serve. You name it. But I think that the equipment, the evolution of the game is not only because of equipment. I think the evolution of the game is for a lot of reasons. I think that, and I think I mentioned this to you in a conversation once before, is, we keep hearing about the evolution of the sport and the comparisons between Laver and Federer, and, and we're going to have the next greatest player is going to come about now. You're going to hear, maybe it will be Medvedev or whoever, and they're going to be comparisons made, to who was the greatest ever. It would be very sad if tennis stayed stagnant. You want every generation of tennis players to be better than the previous one. It happens in all sports. I think that I really believe, and I may be wrong, I may hear a lot about this, but I really believe that Rod Laver would be no match for Federer, even if they were playing with wood rackets, because I think he's an evolved. Federer has just evolved based on the foundation that Laver, that Rod Laver and all of the greats provided. And I think that the same thing is going to happen in the future, that there's going to be another debate down the road, and it's going to be comparing someone to Djokovic or Nadal. And again, it would be sad if it was the case that one of these players now would beat somebody, would beat the player. In 10 years' time, it would be sad if the player that's number one in the world could get beaten by Federer and Nadal or Djokovic. Each generation of players hopefully learns from the previous generation, and that's something we see in other sports also. Just look at sprinters. I think 20 years ago, who was it? Owens. He wouldn't even qualify for the Olympics now, based on his time that he won the Olympics with 20 years ago.
Well, are you referring to Jesse Owens?
Jesse Owens.
36, I think. He was running in Berlin, and Hitler was watching.
And his time now wouldn't even have him qualify for the U.S. trials. He's winning time.
I think that there's so many truths to that. I mean, I don't like to get into the GOAT, the greatest of all time, but I would say this: the tennis teachers of yesteryear are better than the current tennis teachers. That's just my take.
On the technical side, sure. Yeah, because you've got you because of the equipment. I would agree. I would agree with you. You don't get away with.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you don't. There was you got away with far less if you're not hitting a perfect volley, you're not hitting a good volley, or if your technique was poor with a wooden racket and a smaller sweet spot and all that, you don't have much margin for error. So I think it definitely made on that side, with equipment, it definitely made the game easier. But I also think that athletes became bigger, faster, stronger with this new equipment. It's just,
the evolution of the racket. I mean, certainly, the surface as well, and not covering the grass after the rain, not covering the grass after the rain, and with I think on the forehand side, I mean, it was how many of us were taught one grip and had a continental roll, and with I know, like say Ivan Lendl, for example, he said, of course the players are better today, and I do think that they're certainly stronger. I don't necessarily think they're tougher because they're not playing 3 events and how the kind of money they generate and such. But I think Charlie Passerelle, where he said every champion has their day. I always tell people go to YouTube. I actually told Rod Laver this at that time. I was just at an airport, and usually I would leave the famous alone, but I was just exhausted had done this clinic in El Paso, and I just walked by and a little punch drunk, and I go, Rod Laver. And I just sit down, and I had slow motion of Rod Laver in my shoulder bag on DVDs, and I said, do you use YouTube? Because he was so humble. He said, I couldn't play with the players today. And I said, go to YouTube. He goes, my nephew goes to YouTube. And I said, punch in Caesar's Palace, 1975, Connors Laver. And I've talked about it before. Connors wanted the tennis balls open 3 days before the match, 2 or 3 days, because he wanted it to be slower. Laver was semi-retired. But the level of tennis at that time, but players were playing doubles. Players were playing on bad grass. Players were going forward. I think that, so many things today. I think the coaches are less respected. I think that parents are over involved. There's so many different factors. Yeah, it just happens to be, and everybody tells me he's a great kid. I know Scotty Perelman, who's on our podcast. We worked with Braden together. Talked about Sam Rifus. He just won. He just won the NCAAs, and to me, watching that, there was a boy that we've worked with that he beat in the semis, and it's not just.
Was it JK?
No, Liam Draxel. So, but anyway, where I'm thinking, Connors, back the way he was playing in the 70s with his 75-mile-an-hour serve, but how he went forward, how he stayed close to the baseline. I like to ask kids today, what's your mile time? And years ago, everybody knew what their mile time was. And, granted, we're in junior tennis. I do think at the elite level, of course, like what you started off with by saying with Federer versus Laver, the game has evolved to that level. But I really think at the lower levels, even down to challengers and futures, college tennis, Brandon used the word forcing, that in the sport I grew up in, everybody can fly on a pair of skates now. Best teachers I ever had were figure skates. And like say my older brothers, they didn't work with figure skaters. They were older than me where they didn't see videotape. But I really think that there's, certainly the serves, the forehands, the returns are better. But when it comes down to, some of the skills, especially from the service line in, I think there's really a plus-minus column in that debate.
Agreed. No doubt about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the physical side, everything from down to nutrition to training to how they schedule and periodize their calendar, and like Steve was saying, the number of events that players used to have to play. So you have to factor all that in for sure.
I like the story about Ray Ruffles where he was playing with Garolitis at Wimbledon, and he thought the day was over because of rain, but so he was on the grounds drinking a few beers with the boys, mother's milk for the Aussies, and they called him back. And I can't remember exactly, like if he was down 2-0 and he came back and he won the match, but he loosened up with a few beers in between. I don't think the boys drink as many beers as they did back in the day. So, what did Lombardi? Lombardi said, "I'd rather have a whiskey drinker than a milk drinker." So, I think also too the guys. I mean, like yourself from South Africa, being on the other side of the world, or the Aussies. Shaughnessy's an Aussie where they learned to rough it more when they traveled. So I think there's a lot to be said. So I do think there's a plus minus column, but I do think that's unfortunate that a lot of the tennis teachers, a lot of the tennis players today, I think that's great what, Tony Gotzik, agent of Federer, what they put together with the Laver Cup, where you get the older generation teaching the younger generation. Then listen to what, the Fed says is that, the younger guys below us, the reason we're still winning is they don't come to the net. I mean, if people won't listen to Federer, but that, I do think that people really need to dig deep, because if they just listen to the courtside sound bites, they're not reading enough about the sport. They're not learning enough about the sport.
Yeah, I agree.
I got to get this story in. You got another question, Brandon?
I do. Yeah, go, you go first.
Well, this is to plug your new adopted hometown, a little commercial for Salt Lake. I've spent a lot of time in Park City. Actually, we have these Steve stories, using my name in third person. And someone asked me, you haven't done many of those, but I said, that's just because I'm really unorganized at the time. But they asked me if I ran out of stories. We had a mom here a few weeks ago, and she said she knows Richard Hernandez and Miraman, two coaches I've known forever. And she said, well, I'd like to get together and have you tell me some Richard and Miran stories. I said, and her first name's Lucy. I said, I'm already told Lucy stories. Just a mom who's so loving is she's tossing, how's it go, rose petals in front of the kids as they walk by. Can I do anything for you? Can I do anything for you? Mm. But anyway, with Utah, actually there's Park City is so beautiful. There's a family that you've met, the Garcia family. They have a home out there.
Yeah.
All the boys hit the ball well. The younger one, Jose especially, hits the ball very cleanly. But I always tell the brothers, hey, your parents are going to adopt me, and I'm moving to Park City. They're going to adopt me. I'm going to be the oldest child. But I have a connection to Utah. Tom Fye, who's a Braden coach, he was thinking about opening these retail stores, tennis retail stores, back when tennis was booming a little bit more in the Salt Lake area. So we had looked into going out to L.A. I say we. It was Craig Tiley and Dave Anderson. And the three of us, we said, okay, we went out to L.A. and checked that out. Orange County, actually, Southern Cal. But so then, Phi called me up and said, hey, come on up to Salt Lake. And I went up and said, this place is gorgeous. And so we talked about it in the theory of isolation, to go to a place like Salt Lake and say, it'd be a lot easier to make your mark here. Now, we did that in Memphis at one point. And we hoped that some of the work that we did in Memphis with Petrus Kukimore, now he's out there working, that'll come to surface. Even in Minneapolis, Lifetime talking about one time, they have 8 clubs. And just to take an area and say, okay, let's just prove that tennis can be taught really well, and kids need to work on fundamentals in early child development classes. So this ties in with your tennis game. It's a Warren Pretorius story I tell all the time, and it's a great line. You know where I'm going with this. Don't play great, play solid. And, and you've won these senior titles, so I'm the one who went up to Utah, and I did things for the Utah Tennis Association. It wasn't there very long, 18 months. And, Anderson ended up at Club Corp in Brookhaven. He's been there ever since. Tiley became the director of instruction before he was the coach at Illinois. And then I went to Seguzo Bassett. But so anyway, I was up there, and you get a kick out of this is that, so I'm with Phi, he ends up giving me the elbow. This woman asked me, Steve, are you LDS? And I said, yeah, I think everybody is. LDS, Learning Disabled Student. Not Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. But there was young Corbin Archer. We worked with him, and I think he got to like the 3rd round of Kalamazoo. He later went to Illinois, and that was the connection with Tiley. There was a kid, I think, Danny Summerhays, I think way back when, ISTP. He won a state title very quickly. There was a kid, Brad Hasna, who was a very good athlete.
Yeah.
And he was unseeded, worked with them. And, of course, we still have film of all this. We have pre-post film of these kids. This goes back. So Hasna, unseeded, he wins the Intermountain. And I can remember, Robbie Seguzo saying, this kid's a good athlete. This kid can play, and showing Robbie a pre-post because he owned an academy with his wife. And So we got Brad Hasen, he's hitting with Vince Spadia. And Seguzo's going, this guy's pretty good. I go, that was the kid we showed you on the video. This is where people have to change their strokes. So many times in the trenches, you just have to fight battles to convince people they have to work on technique. And, the Archer and Hazard, they're really nice kids, Danny Summerhays. But, they really, Archer and Hazard came down to Florida for a while. They're used to club coaching. They weren't used to, okay, this is a different level, boys. So I don't think a lot of times juniors are really prepared to be college tennis players. But through all this, so I make a video of Corbin Archer, make a video of everybody. So Peter Mallett, your doubles player, you'll have to tell us about Peter. So he calls me up and I'm like, uh-oh, I just have a message. Peter Mallett called. And I go, well, at that time I didn't know Peter. He said, well, he's a coach at Canyon Creek. He's the best player in Salt Lake. And so I said, all right, here goes. Call him up. I get it all the time. And because it's, it can be a little incriminating, if somebody's been giving somebody lessons for 3 years and you make a videotape for them. So Peter says, I watched that video you made. I go, uh-huh. He goes, yeah, I watched it twice. I go, uh-huh. And I said, well, what do you think? He goes, can you make one for me?
Yeah.
And I said, sure. So next thing you know, I'm doing some work with Peter Mallett. And this is great for the listeners because he's a fantastic tennis player. He goes, I've never been able to hit a bloody forehand. So he'd already done so much in tennis, and you could talk about that. But he went on, and after that, he won all the 35s. But so this is for the listeners. This is Park City's a beautiful place. Warren's adopted hometown. But Warren's won a lot of balls with the USTA senior tournaments. And this is what Peter Mallett told you. Correct me if I'm wrong. Don't play great, play solid. And
yeah.
I mean, that's just fantastic. Because kids, I always ask, like I'll ask girls, are you playing Serena today? I mean, just keep the ball in play. Vic Braden, let the other player take gas. Welby Van Horn, just let the other player blow it. Why don't you let them miss once or twice instead of you missing all the time? Why don't you comment on Peter and your senior tennis and some thoughts on along those lines?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that So I won some gold balls and all of that, but I think that my real talent was that I picked my partners well. Peter Mallett being one of them. Okay, he was amazing. He was definitely. He won so many tournaments that year. He beat. They'd have touring pros come. Guys on tour come out here and play him in exhibitions, and he would be right there with him. He played Wayne Ferreira once, and when Wayne was doing well. Yes, granted he was an off season, but he played him pretty tough. I think he lost the one set exhibition, he lost in a tiebreaker. So Peter was really, really good, and he was a competitor like second to none, just really smooth. And he played college tennis. I think it was Oklahoma. He was a top player there. Very good in Australia. I believe there's an alternate for. He played with Wally Masur, so he's friends with him. Alternate is the Davis Cup, I believe. But he was really good on the local scene. Peter was great to watch, and I think in the age divisions he won a ton of gold balls. And I think in the 35s, I think he won all 4 and never lost a set. So he's pretty much a legend, but also the most humble guy out there. So I have known, I can believe your story completely, is that he would say, hey, he wants one done of himself so he could get better. But he played. I remember we were playing double. We were playing down at Canyon Racket Club. I think we were playing, and which is no longer around. And I was going big on returns and all of that, and he just come over to me and goes, "Don't be great, just be solid. It's like go for the middle of the court on the return. It's like you don't have to do anything fancy." And I always remember that when I was playing. And he lived by it. He was a great player.
A lot of our listeners are tennis parents taking their kid to practice or taking their kids to tournaments. That's got to be put on the refrigerator. People they try to play shots they don't own. They play outside themselves, but that's very well put. I think something else that you can certainly learn from the Aussies is that expression, no worries, mate. I like how Ash Barty says, I'm just going to let the chips fall where they fall. But this is an experience for me with, so Peter Mallett's practicing with Greg Holmes. And Greg Holmes was top 20 in the world. Of course, they're playing high altitude. And so they just play a set, and Mallett wins. But he said, no, I'm going to hold my serve. And he goes, the first sniff, the first chance I have to go forward. And, granted, perhaps a little, I'm sure, I don't know all the history, but I would think that Greg Holmes probably knew him when he was much younger and had respect. And, Pete Peters got in that situation coming off the lesson court, how's it go? Everything to win, nothing to lose. And, but the idea of playing an approach volley, so that's what I tell kids all the time, especially, Carlos Goffey 2 weeks ago, you're up a green light point. They hit you, that floating duck come in, and then you think of like a Jimmy Connors, or he takes all those stutter steps and he waits for the ball to come down where the racket faces vertical. Then you can just tag, you can drive the conventional approach volley. And, that's a shot that's just become a lost art. But just to think, like, here's a guy who's top 20 in the world, and he's going, okay, I'm going to hit body serves, come in, make my first volley, I'm winning my serve. And I get the first chance to get in. That's why Sampras was so great. He'd hold serve. It's like Gonzalez, he would hold serve, and he could really take risks on the return, because if you just know you're going to hold serve. But, to be a serve and volley, you have to have a serve and a volley. And if you spend your whole, youth, never serving and volleying, it's very bleak that you're going to start doing it when you get to be 17, 18. But that's very good. How about for yourself, is success in senior tennis, you're one of those wiry guys who can just move, right? You don't even have to work at it and you can move? Or do you have to work at it?
No, I think I was born vertically challenged, so it was definitely not going to be one thing growing up in high altitude in Johannesburg, and especially living in Park City, was your game, revolves around getting to the net. So I think that we learned really early on that you've got a certain volley, and you got to chip and charge, and you learn to get to the net. So definitely I could never build my game around standing on the baseline and rallying, and definitely not going to go big on the serve, because I'm 5'9". It's like there's only so much I can do. And as I told you earlier, is I have technical deficiency on my serve. I serve palm up, so I had some limiting factors. But yeah, it was movement and getting to the net. That I think that if there was anything that my coaches did well, was volley technique.
I thought you were going to say you do yoga every day. There's yoga, yoga in your family, right? Don't you have a son who's a yoga teacher, right?
Yeah, my youngest son is a yoga instructor. But yeah, I did find when I was even now as you get older, you get injured. You get injured more. I think tennis is being so one-sided dominant. I think you lends itself to injuries. And now I had rotator cuff problems and all that. But what I do is Orange Theory. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty gung ho. I think that Orange Theory changed a lot about about why I can now still play and all that, and only because it's functional movement. It's nothing crazy or anything like that. You do it at your own pace. You set your own limits and all of that, and you're doing exercises that I ordinarily would not do if I just go to the gym. Because go to the gym, I work out, love working out, run and all that, but it's not. I didn't get variety. You find you go to the weight room and you do the same thing just week in and week out. You have your own you get your own system going, and it's pretty. There's no variety. So with Orange Theory, I really believe in that. I believe in. So I go to Orange Theory. I go to Orange Theory even now 4-5 times, sometimes every day.
I would say that's certainly more up Brandon's alley. I would say that Brandon anybody who spent a lot of time with me, I said, okay, you got to learn to replicate my skill set. Then you have to have your own new skill set. And that's one thing that Brandon has here at the Performance Center, physical therapists, physical trainers, yoga teacher, masseuse. Yeah, so I thought you would say that you're doing some yoga with every day. Yoga.
I need to do more, for sure. Stretching and yoga and all that. But at the moment, I think at least I'm doing something that I would be if I went back 20 years ago and told myself what I'd be doing now with Orange Theory, I think I'd be proud of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wind this thing down. It's been great to listen to you. I mean, now you have so much to offer. It's great what you're doing for tennis. Kind of a breakthrough guy, or definitely a breakthrough guy, taking tennis to a higher level. But Brandon, you got a question to end it on?
Yeah, more of a request, and thanks for your time tonight. I know you're a super busy guy, and I'm going to add a little more work to your plate if you don't mind.
Okay.
I've got some research projects for you here. Of course, I'm just kind of joking, but I think that someone who appreciates stats like yourself would be really interesting to try to measure the ripple effect of the Williams sisters, and I think it'd be really interesting to measure the number of pro players who are, say, to some level of success in the professional game, say it's top 100 on either side, who have had a parent, or to go as far as say a parent or a relative who was a tennis coach themselves, purely from the aspect of the financial side, where if your tennis coach is your dad or your tennis coach is your mom, they're probably not charging you for their time on the tennis court. Certainly, like we talked about before, charging you to watch your matches. As you said, the barrier for entry in tennis being so high, with the cost of good instruction. But I thought those are just a couple small patterns that just over the approximately 2 hours of talking to you, as someone who appreciates statistics might look into those for us. So in about 2 weeks, I'll be expecting that email in my inbox. Is that all right?
Sure, I'll drop everything else. Get right on it.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I love statistics as well, and really enjoyed it, and really happy to hear what you're doing and have been doing in the game for a long time now, and certainly something that the sport of tennis sorely needs. So appreciate all your efforts and your time with us tonight.
Yeah, I also appreciate everything that you guys are doing. I do read, do follow up, read all of the articles and that. In fact, Steve, if you look at we have that stat of the week that we put out every week. It's just one stat, which, you can tell parents and all them to go to tennisanalytics.net, and then there's that stat of the week. And it's just one stat. And, for the last month, I've been talking about different aspects of Orange Bowl. And then we did Australian Open, we did all of that. And it's just one key stat that is of interest. It's designed to be like a 30-second read. Okay. But I did plug, I did something like a net appearance in the last couple of articles. And I did actually embed your Facebook post with getting to the net on one of the articles. So there are a few there from you and Andy Fitzel. So I do follow what you guys are doing, and I respect it, and sometimes plagiarize a little bit.
Actually, I appreciate that. A lot of the people in our so-called network sent me copies of that. With first of all, doubles clinics. Let's just touch upon that. I know Brandon, he's got 2 schools, 2 clubs, municipalities, many irons in the fire. But tell the listeners a little about the doubles clinics that you're doing. Then also too, like say Dave Nostrand, Mark Jakes, I mentioned. Andy Fitzel, people that we've worked with, that worked with you. You mentioned the brain game with Craig O'Shaughnessy. How do people get in touch with you? I mean, that would be my second question. The first one is just tell the listeners a little about the doubles clinics you're doing, because it's not, sure you're at the U.S. Open, you're at Wimbledon, but you've got a project going where you're helping club players out.
Yeah, I think that the next, we always look at collecting data. We always look at the top down, the top tier, top 12-year-old, top 14-year-old, top 16. But if you look at the demographic in tennis, I mean, there's probably more 3-5 and 4-0 players than there are, the juniors, and there are a lot more club players than there are, juniors and pros. So we did a couple of pilot projects. One was with the USTA. I did one internally, and then did some stuff at Lifetime Tennis. And we've done about 8 of these clinics. So basically, players come in for 3 hours, and they play. They play match play. So it's doubles, and they play time match play. And we have cameras on the court, and we film. We don't tell them anything. We just tell them, ahead of time what we're going to be doing. We're filming, charting their matches. So they play for 3 hours. We get this footage. We then bring them all back in, and they have a luncheon, and we do a presentation where we show them what they're going to get and what we're going to do for them. But we also then do a presentation, based on what the findings from other players of their level, like serve placements, like where the errors are happening, where the rally lengths, all of that stuff, just data. And there's no condescending. You never ever call a 3-5 player a recreational player, because there are some 3-5 and 4-0 players that are more serious about tennis than I've ever been. So they are, they're also looking to improve. I mean, if you're a 3-5 player, even if you're a 16 handicap golfer, it's a big deal if you can just knock 2 shots off of your handicap. So I think it's the same thing. Moving from a 3-0 to a 3-5 to a 4-0 and all that is a big deal. So what we do is we give them the same level of analytics, and we give it back to them within a few days of the camp, and then we do a follow-up call, which is a Zoom call, and everyone gets on, and we just look at the group's findings for the group, and tell them what it means and what they should pay attention to and what they share, and then they will take that and share that, the video and all of that and the data, with their coach. And at that point, obviously, the coach, you hand it off. We're not trying to get in between their coach and that. When we started running those, initially it was just me going out and running them, and then I thought, I cannot do them all the time. So we started having sort of coaches, and it's not a big, massive training session, because we're not talking about philosophies or anything like that. We're just showing coaches how to film a match and how to submit it for processing, and then a basic understanding of the stats. So we show them how to do that, and then so the idea now is to run more of those camps, and grow a network of coaches. In fact, Pretorius, I talked to him about doing it. I think he's interested, but at first got to let him settle into his new role. And this would be something that a coach could run at their facility to supplement what they're doing. Offer something different, and it's not like it has to be done every week. They run one a quarter, and then we've already seen every single one we've run. We've had we filled them up.
You do it with 16 players, correct?
Yeah, so we run a 4 courts. We get 16 players, and they come in and they play doubles, and then they then switch. That's time match play. That's almost like the winners move up and losers move down, or whatever. We just do a round robin play, so we know the level of teams, the level of each player before they come out. So we want to get competitive match play. So we've run them with 4 courts, and we film, and then players play, and it's turned out to be a pretty good concept. We've also run the same concept in singles, and we've run a couple with juniors, because a lot of juniors are not getting any analytics. So what they do is they come to this workshop, if you will, and they come for 3 hours. They play singles, and their matches get charted. We chart their matches, and then give that back to the player and the parents and to their coach. And so we're offering a service. So that concept is more like, you run it on a quarterly basis. It should be run more often, but anything is better than nothing. And we want to go to clubs and, run that kind of workshop, once a month. It's not like I don't want to be the one that's there. You want to enable the coach, the pro that's there to run this workshop. And we're just providing the service that we do, doing the data stuff, doing the work behind the scenes, and then give it back to the coach and with some of the findings. And also some of the benchmark information. Because as we start collecting all this data from club players and that database grows and grows and grows, and the benchmarks become, much more solid. So yeah, that's an exciting project that
it's a great concept. I have to come down and pull it off at one of Brandon's clubs.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great to coordinate.
Yeah, I think we should do one out your way.
Absolutely. Great.
I expect you have a sign up in 2 weeks' time, Brandon.
That's good. Good. But how do people get in touch with you?
So just go to our website. So it's tennisanalytics.net. And my email is just, Warren at tennisanalytics.net. So everything's on the web.
Yeah. But no, a lot of takeaways from this, Warren, but appreciate your time. Fantastic. I know that we have a lot of people that will really benefit from your time, what you've shared the last few hours.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Warren.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add before we let you go?
Just that I'm hungry and I can smell some pizza downstairs.
Did you go snow skiing today?
No, I didn't. I'm probably going to go at the end of the. I'm going to take a day off on Friday. It's very difficult to do it during the week. There's a lot going on in that. So I think I may play hooky on Friday because the snow is really good. It's snowing out there now, and we're going to get snow tonight and tomorrow. So
last question I have is, how old are you now?
I'm 57.
57, because at one of the facilities where Brandon and his team have a contract, they have a senior event coming up in April. It's on clay. Maybe a South African from Johannesburg is going to skip that. How do you like it? Do you like clay?
I'll probably skip that one. No, I really like clay. But I get passed. I get passed on that one like crazy. I remember playing. I played. If you ever played, his nickname was the Magician. Pablo Araya. I played him in the finals of a clay court in a senior tournament and it was in Naples on clay, and I played him in a where I thought I was doing pretty well and all that, and he made me look like a 12-year-old. He passed me. He passed me with balls that were coming at 5 miles an hour. It was just humiliating.
Maybe one of the greatest feats of all time in tennis. The late Barry McKay, who very affable. Everybody loved him as a commentator. He won the Italian Open. He used to just serve and go forward on everything. And they said, "How did you do it?" He said, "Well, I served and I brought the baseline with me." meaning that he couldn't be passed. But no, I think that's a great challenge for anyone, is to be able to play on all the different surfaces. But Warren, thank you.
Enjoy that pizza.
Okay, guys, thanks you.
Warren.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, actually, one thing, Warren, is you did help out one of our associates, Steve Campbell, through one of your contacts. I know you called Andy Fitzell. I talked to you, but through your connection, he secured a job at a really nice resort in Virginia. But so anyway, big thanks for that. It's just amazing, all the connections. But anyway,
yeah, you're welcome.
Pizza. Thanks again.
Okay, see you guys.
All right, good night.
Bye.
Flanagan. Another great session.
Excellent session. Yeah, I can smell some pizza downstairs at our performance center here.
Give me one takeaway. I'll give you one.
I'll give you one takeaway. I think it's another. Obviously, he's stepped away from so much of the on-court club pro coaching and, being a director of tennis, et cetera, et cetera. And we've talked to college coaches. We've talked to someone like Cole Reeves, Carlos Goffey, different people who have been very influential in the sport of tennis. And Warren is certainly one of those guys. But a pattern that I see, and another person who's played multiple sports, had to really work for their time on the court. Warren talked about hitting the backboard, but again, that pattern of being a multi-sport athlete and not having everything given to them or handed to them, not being entitled, and look at what they're doing. They're making great impacts in the sport that we all love. So that's my takeaway, Steve.
Takeaway for me is I've known Warren a long, long time, and but it's always been in an academic setting, in a coach's workshop, conference, having a beer. But I'm going to ask Andy Fitzell about his serve. I don't think it's as bad as he's saying. But then I could say, Andy, definitely it's a regress palm up. It's not a beginner's palm up. And how does he compensate? And did he make any changes? And, tell me about Warren Pretorius' serve. I think very humble. I don't think it's as bad as he says it is, because you don't have gold balls if you have that bad a serve. Mm-hmm. But thank you. Podcast 83 in the books. I know some of you, thank you. You've listened to all 83. We will get around after we've had 100 of these. We'll get down to the show notes and taking some notes. But one thing that I know he does follow, you mentioned what we put out on Facebook. We're telling juniors all the time, we don't want you to spend all this time on social media, but we have GreatBase Instagram, GreatBase Facebook. We have courses. We have 5 free courses online. And all we're doing is sharing information that we've gathered. And we, over now close to 50 years, have put a lot of homework together. But, Warren is certainly not one of our pillars, because we just go with the people that we were working with in the 80s. But, no, it's great to, someone like Warren, that's what needs to happen, is he's, improved upon what Bill Jacobson was doing, and people need to be in tune with that, and they need to go to tennis analytics, and they need to study that. I mean, we're talking really about the coaches. I know my son Connor, for example, I said, hey, you should be just reading those articles on the brain game. He had a bad injury where he went his shoulder first into the net post. Not as bad as like a James Blake, and I think he broke his neck. But I said to Connor, why don't you just come back and be a bluff and just tell everybody, I had such a bad injury. It was a bad, bad bruise. I said, why don't you just come back and tell everybody that you're just going to specialize in doubles, but still play singles and just go to the net. Just go in. I do think, with college tennis, Ty Tucker helped him out so much. But, I think he played better tactically before he went to college, because it was go forward, play an all-court game, not forehand. But no, I think there's so many things. Another takeaway, obviously, would be, go to the net. I mean, I think that people treat the net like it's a rattlesnake that's going to bite them. People want to travel around the world being a tennis player, but they won't go 39 feet forward.
That's a good line.
Yeah, I'm going to go write that on one of your bathroom walls. You have 4 bathrooms here, and I should have the right to write it on one of the bathroom walls. That's what you get for being almost 70. Anyway, adios amigos. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.